Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Yountville Town Council meeting for Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. Welcome to many faces we don't often see here in the room, so it's nice to have a relatively full house. Go ahead and ask for a roll call, please.
Councilmember Durham Baker,
Here.
Councilmember Durham,
Here.
Councilmember Mueller,
Here.
Vice Mayor Dorman,
Here.
Mayor Dunbar.
Here, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would entertain a motion to adopt tonight's agenda unless there are any questions.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Eddie, are we trying to do electronic voting, or are we going to,
Well, we can. Is it showing up on yours?
as long as it's going to work? That passed unanimously, by the way. We can try it on the consent calendar. Public comment on anything not on our agenda, so that means most of you not yet. If there's anything you'd like to address the council on that's not listed. Mayor, are you getting up? Or are you stretching your legs?
Good
Not
evening.
on tonight's agenda. Okay.
My name is Cindy Saucerman. I'm at 6468 Washington Street, number 32. Good evening, Mayor Dunbar, Vice Mayor Dorman, council members. I'm reporting back from the beautiful city of Todos Santos on the Pacific coast, where it's about 78 degrees. Nice, cool ocean breeze. And I can't wait to get back there. I just wanted to let you know that they were elated with your resolution and the article from the Napa Valley Register. I got it through social media, and Todos Santos, they had it up and running before I even got there. They're very excited to work with the town of Yountville. We're in the process of producing an agreement or a memorandum of understanding, and once that's finalized and translated into Spanish, you'll see it. It'll come back to you, Mayor Dunbar, and for your signature, and we'll move forward. So hopefully one of you or several of you will be interested in serving on the standing committee to see these objectives and goals, whatever they might be, move through. So congratulations, and I'm very excited to be your liaison and help you through this process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak on an item not on tonight's agenda? We're all saving it for later. Okay. Thank you very much, Mayor. Next up is our consent calendar. We have, I believe, 5 items on consent for consideration. Is there a question or is there action on the consent calendar?
I make a motion, we accept the consent calendar.
Second.
Are we successfully doing the electronic version? I think we might. All in favor,
Aye.
please cast your ballot.
It didn't come up on my screen.
We're gonna, all in favor? Is it unanimous?
Aye.
There we go.
Aye.
We can't leave everyone in suspense about the
Oh,
consent calendar.
Just came up.
Didn't know which way it was going to go.
Okay, so that passes unanimously. Next up is my state of the town address, and I'm just going to call it up here. I know that's why you're all here, and so I appreciate that. So, but there will be no public comment after my state of the. This is my state of the town of Yountville for January 21st, 2020. At its core, Yountville is dynamic. The town has embraced change even longer than the 55 years since incorporation. Some parts of our community look very much like they did decades ago, while others have been part of a steady, thoughtful evolution. Orchards have grown into residential neighborhoods. Businesses have changed hands. empty lots have turned into world-class restaurants, lodging, and a variety of commercial and retail offerings. The landscape that surrounds us has endured natural and man-made disasters, but continues to provide picturesque scenic beauty. And through it all, Yountville has remained a small town with a charming character and sense of community that's quite special. I was reminded of these enduring characteristics of our town in a rather unusual setting. The first scenic workout that I rode on my new Peloton stationary bike a few months ago was a tour of the Napa Valley wine country. The 30-minute video began on Washington Street just south of the town limits and headed north through town. It eventually ended in Calistoga. What struck me was that it clearly was filmed about 10 years ago, based on the Yountville streetscape represented in the video. In the first few minutes, I saw Hotel Yountville prior to its expansion and affordable housing, then a Veterans Memorial Park not yet renovated with new features, including memorial medallions, the Faces of Freedom sculpture, and the mini amphitheater, and later a dirt, weed-filled lot that's now home to Handwritten Wines and Monte Cristi Panama hats. Further up the street, the Whistle Stop was not yet JCB Village, nor had Mini Model Bakery replaced the Coffee Caboose. Chef Bob Hurley still was years from retirement and the handover of his restaurant to Chef Thomas Keller for its revival as La Calenda. Pacific Blues still operated in the space now known as Coqueta. The Heston Vineyards tasting facility had just broken ground. The sister hotels Villaggio Inn and Spa and Vintage Inn were showing their age prior to the major redesigns to Hotel Villaggio and Vintage House. At the north end of Yountville, Stewart Cellars and Southside Cafe had not yet replaced McGrath's Garage. The former home to Frankie, Johnny, and Luigi's, Père Gentil, and PJ Steak had been leveled, but the vintage olive trees and chandeliers that highlight the three-building RH were years from the drawing board. Construction fencing surrounded Washington Square during its transformation to R&D Kitchen, Kelly's Fuel and Provision, Gerard Tasting Room, and other retail spaces. Yountville Community Park had not yet been upgraded to more safely and comfortably welcome residents and visitors of all ages to one of our most beautiful and popular gathering spots. These scenes were reminders of the makeup of Yountville then and how our town has grown as we enter a new calendar decade. I thought of other landmarks in our town's history, some distant memories and some still fresh in our minds. Some were easily welcomed additions, while others were met with doubt and even strong opposition. 25 years ago, Chef Thomas Keller moved to town and launched Yountville into a trajectory of culinary excellence that continues today. I believe only Ponch's can claim a longer local business operation. Those around just a few years after the town incorporated recall how divisive the vote was to preserve the agriculture that surrounds us. The town endured a decade-long building moratorium while searching for a long-term water supply solution. That held up the transformation of the Bardosono family home and vineyard to the celebrated hotel and spa it is today. It's easy to take for granted our Yountville Community Center and Plaza and all the programs and events held there now, but the doors did not open until after a long battle of differing views and a contentious mayoral election. Last June, 10 years after the town council adopted an equal rights resolution, we raised a rainbow flag that stated loudly and proudly that our community embraces inclusion and equality. Over several years, and due to the dedication of residents, business owners, and town leaders, a robust art scene emerged with our townwide art walk and many events elevating music, visual arts, and activities that showcase local and national talent and creativity. We've also had to acknowledge that our community is not immune to loss and pain. Our World Trade Center Memorial Artifact stands as an enduring reminder that we should never forget the lives lost and how our world forever changed on September 11, 2001. We remember the 3 brave women lost to gun violence in our town nearly 2 years ago. And we will continue to hear Elena's voice say enough. A major part of the foundation of Yountville, the California Veterans Home, continues its mission to provide a comfortable and an enjoyable setting worthy of the commitment and sacrifice our heroic men and women veterans and their families gave to all of us. The Veterans Home also still hosts the Lincoln Theater, Napa Valley Museum, Vintners Golf Course, Borman Field, and until recently, our community swimming pool. All that took vision and investment by people who wanted to add culture, recreation, and enjoyment to all of our lives. Our community was divided over the fate of a centuries-old oak tree that caused the closure of part of our pathway system for more than 2 years before the failing health of the tree led to its removal. We have invested significantly in the comfort and protection of our residents, building a flood wall around our 2 mobile home parks, maintaining our facilities and infrastructure, and providing emergency relief during power outages, floods, earthquakes, and wildfire threats. We have strived to protect and preserve our environment as well, with programs and investment in water conservation and recycling, energy efficiency, and greenhouse gas and solid waste reduction. In 2019, the standout development in our community was the Napa Valley Unified School District's vote to close Yountville Elementary School after providing public education for generations of children in our community. The fate of that campus will garner significant attention and deliberation in 2020. Last year, the town expanded our park system, extended the town-wide pedestrian pathway, renovated our last streetlights for energy efficiency, and installed a generator at our community hall for emergency backup power. We also finalized a 2-year process updating our Envision Yountville general plan that will guide us for the next couple of decades. We supported the efforts at the Veterans Home to build a new 240-bed skilled nursing facility and continued to work with other stakeholders on the possibility of building affordable workforce housing on that campus. Town voters reinforced the need for more affordable housing with the passage of Measure S, which increased the hotel tax by 1% to generate funding specifically for workforce housing and related programs. We initiated time parking along sections of Washington Street that experienced the most parking demands, and we tried to reduce commercial impacts in our residential neighborhoods by prohibiting bus, shuttle, and limousine parking there. Some in town have asked us to phase out gas-powered landscaping equipment to eliminate the noise and air pollution they cause. That remains under consideration. We also need to prepare for the impacts state mandates may have in altering the appearance of our town by requiring more housing density in our single-family neighborhoods, certain types of business development, as well as policies that create more aggressive energy efficiency and resiliency. Part of our past has included, and I hope our future will continue to include, a vision beyond ourselves and our time. We honor and showcase our history. We encourage innovation and creativity in business and in our town services. And we provide myriad lifestyle choices and ways to make Yountville our own kind of special. Last September, I stood next to the Vice Mayor, Principal Tara Bianchi, parents and students of the Yountville Elementary School for the final first day of the school year. While I don't look forward to attending the first final day of the school year this June, I do look forward to the next year and decade of evolution in the amazing place we get to call home. Through it all, it's the diverse, generous, and kind people of our town that have made it and will continue to make Yountville such a special community. Thank you. So with that, I will go back to our agenda, and we will get to our first administrative regular item because we have no public hearings. And we will start with an application for grant funding for the Cal Home program. Daniel.
Good evening, Council. Happy belated Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Earlier this month, you considered an application for the town to apply for the HOME program. Tonight, you have before you a resolution authorizing the town to apply for CalHome funds. The CalHome program is directed by the state, and it enables low-income households to become homeowners or improve the safety of their homes. These grants are provided to local public agencies or towns like us, as well as nonprofit developers to assist individual households through deferred payment loans. And grants are awarded through a competitive process after the issuance of a NOFA, which is why this is before you tonight. To answer any questions you may have, we have Andrea Clark here from the Housing Authority of the City of Napa.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions of the staff report from the council? Yes, Vice Mayor?
Thank you for the report. One of the bullet points in the staff report that says eligible activities include, and it says accessory dwelling unit, junior accessory dwelling unit assistance. Is that covered in our application?
I'm gonna pull up this one.
Currently, that is not covered in the application. However, I guess if staff wanted to pursue that type of project, it is a possibility to add it to your application. However, I'm not sure how well you will score in that area because I believe the NOFA indicated that they wanted to see at least a 2-year history of that type of program already ongoing at the town.
Okay, thank you.
It is a possibility that you could use the housing authority's experience, but I don't know that they would give you a very high score in that area.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
If I could on that, if the council's interested, we've conveyed that we'll continue to work with the housing authority on some of the other program opportunities. One of the challenges we also face is that a lot of our property parcels have a high value, and the addition of an ADU may actually increase the property value over the threshold. But I think there's been enough interest that staff will continue to do a little research on some of the other potential project opportunities to see what might be feasible. And as again, we're learning some of the projects need to be shovel ready, and we may be a couple years away on some of our ideas. But it could very well be that if we're able to create a conceptual program to fund ADUs, we could look at that. So I think we'll take that as an invitation to do a little more research.
Other thing I wanted to indicate too is that the recipients of these loans through the CalHome program have to be low income. Even the homeowner that you want to assist to build the junior unit or an accessory dwelling unit, they have to be low income. So that might hinder the program a little bit. You're welcome.
It just restricts it. It doesn't hinder it. It just restricts
It restricts the number of people that you can assist. Yeah, yeah. And what we did learn at our NOFA training is that there isn't any restrictions that the state requires on the rental unit. So they're the nice thing about this is because it is a kind of a developing program, the cities or towns can then decide how they want to restrict the units if they so choose to. As far as do you want to restrict the units to an income, lower income, or the rents to a lower income? Do you want to restrict them for the 30 years that you have your rehab agreement on the property? So there is some ways to be creative, but I think this is going to take some time to develop a program, and it is brand new. So I think we will see it come out again next year when they issue the NOFA. And then maybe be ready to apply for something like that for you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions of either Andrea or staff? No, thank you.
Okay.
Any member of the public have a comment about this particular item? Seeing no one move forward, I'll entertain a motion to accept the staff recommendation and make this application. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
I think we need to read it though, don't we? The
Okay.
resolution.
I
Yeah.
Move adoption of resolution number 20-3969, authorizing the submittal of an application to the California State Department of Housing and Community Development for funding under the Cal Home program.
I will second.
And we're going to try to do this electronic voting again. Please vote.
I don't have it.
Me neither.
I vote
Okay,
aye.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. Just like it says up there. All right. Next up, we're talking about a sub-region housing allocation committee for consideration. We'll start with a staff report. Sandra?
Good evening. Tonight you have before you a resolution that would authorize the town to become a member of the Napa Subregion Housing Allocation Committee, and that committee would administer the RENA process for the whole Napa subregion for the next housing element cycle of 2022 to 2030. As you know, the RENA is a state-mandated process to identify the number of housing unit by affordability level that each jurisdiction must accommodate over the course of the housing element. The process is repeated every 8 years, and like I said, the next cycle is 2022 to 2030. In the current cycle, the town was allocated 17 units in the very low, and moderate income ranges. The talk is that that number will increase significantly, maybe 50%, maybe double, and the town's housing element would have to identify where we could locate. Housing element law allows 2 or more jurisdictions to join together to do a separate but parallel process to the state process, and that is the one before you tonight. The idea in doing a local process is that local governments can work collaboratively to have numbers that are more locally relevant and more meaningful. The Napa jurisdictions have been discussing it. Last week, Napa County signed their resolution and appointed Supervisors Wagen Connect and Supervisor Gregory to join the committee. Tonight it is before all the other Napa County jurisdictions with the exception of Calistoga. So if you do have interest in joining this group, you would select 2 members to serve on that committee. The first meeting would be held, or is anticipated to be held, the second week in February, and at that meeting you would accept the draft RFP for an outside consultant, confirm the cost-sharing agreement, confirm the 2 designated representatives from each jurisdiction, adopt the rules for decision-making, and then also receive background on the RENA and sub-RENA processes and an update on the Housing Methodology Committee of ABAG. The county is taking the lead in this effort, and they would select an outside consultant would be selected. It's anticipated that that would run in the range of a cost of $10,000 to $15,000 per jurisdiction. And the town has set aside money for this effort, and it's important to note that we participated in the process for the last cycle of 2014 to 2022. The last thing that I want to share is that any of the sub-regional entities may withdraw prior to the draft methodology being presented to HCD by providing written notice to ABAG. So it provides an opportunity to have the discussion on how housing can be shared in this county, but doesn't obligate a jurisdiction that's not satisfied with the process or decides that they'd be satisfied with their own RENA numbers at the state level. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of that report? Councilmember Durham?
I apologize for not discussing this earlier, but what's Calistoga's reason for not participating? My meaning is there something else we need to consider?
Well, in past years, Up Valley jurisdictions receive a pretty small allocation. Calistoga feels that even with an increase, they'll be able to accommodate them, and they're not so sure what the outcome of the process would be.
I think with some of their housing projects that are already in construction or approved, they're significantly over their minimum allocation, even with the anticipated increases, I think. That's at least part of the reason.
So, I apologize, but I don't know the whole process, but are we not moving towards that same position in this community? So therefore, money's been allocated.
Yes.
We need to utilize it for this.
Steve, you go and then I'll go.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there's one other factor when you ask about Calistoga. Calistoga still has a lot of developable property zoned for housing, so they have options that way. We don't. So one of the things that we're looking at, we may be a participant in sharing. In other words, another area may take some of our housing based on this potential. And right now, that's why it's called a sub-region, where you're looking at the allocation together. We may be in a situation, if the veterans' home property is, allows to go forward, but we also have an issue right now that we don't have jurisdiction over the veterans' home. So that's a big challenge for us. So what I would say is, we're also closest to the larger centers, so it makes sense for us to stay. As Planning Director Liston has indicated, we have an opportunity to review. Our concern is that if we get a count of, say, 34 or so, that's very challenging, and we just don't. We're hearing very mixed messages other than expect the count to be higher. And what I would also say is more than likely the count's also going to be higher on the hardest to build, which are the very low and low. So I think it serves us, again, we briefed the council during last year's budget development, and we included some money in planning contract services to at least participate, see where the process goes. And then, if it doesn't make sense for the town, then we'll evaluate that and bring that back to you at that point. And you will also have 2 elected officials involved in the discussion and review of the process. But at this point, we have some ideas. I just don't know that we're going to have them in fruition enough to generate housing.
Thank you very much.
So the one thing that's agreed upon in every jurisdiction is they're going to go up, and most agree that they're going to go up significantly. Some cities have seen dramatic increase in numbers. When the number doesn't sound like a lot, 17, if it becomes 50, where do we put them? And it starts to impact existing neighborhoods. We run out of land very quickly. So we're in a position where there's also a concern about equity, not just either buying your way out or convincing other jurisdictions to take our commitment for housing. We're in close enough proximity to somewhere like the city of Napa that there's an equity solution there. Calistoga is a little more challenged that way, that if they need a neighbor within close proximity, a little more challenged to share. So,
and I think I just also add one thing is, as we are currently seeing a lot of the discussion go, prior REMA cycles were based on our zoning to potentially permit. We have every reason to believe in the current legislation that there's efforts going to be made to change the criteria to include some factor of actual production as opposed to just planning for. So there's a lot of variables, and really what we're doing is suggesting that we participate in a regional discussion and planning effort to see what moves forward.
Thank you very much.
any other questions of the staff report? Any member of the public want to comment on this item? Seeing none. Consideration by the council. We have 2 things. 1, do we want to participate? And 2, if so, 2 members that would represent the town. I was on that last subcommittee, and it makes total sense for us to participate, I think. Being able to share some of our numbers. We can't assume whether the Catholic Church property or the Veterans Home campus are going to be available to us. We are very, I believe, positive in thinking that both will at some point, but we also have a clock that's ticking to make sure that we keep our housing element certified. So I would encourage us to participate. Then the question is, which of us would be members? So,
if I could on that, I might remind the council you have a housing committee, and it could be that you assign the task to the housing committee, or you could assign new members. I just want to remind you, you do have that.
I love that idea.
you're not on the housing committee, are you?
Correct.
Yeah.
And is that an ad hoc or a standing committee, since it's been going a while? Mr. Attorney?
It's moved to a standing committee.
Which one, the housing or the Sabrina would be? The Sabrina is a countywide.
When the housing is moved to a standing.
Okay.
I'm just saying you could designate, this is an ad hoc committee because it will be a joint countywide one. So, but I'm just saying it could be that you designate that task to you members of the housing committee, if I clarify it that way.
Any further discussion about, so are we at least in a head nod agreement that we want to participate?
Yes.
And we can get that part done?
Yes.
And then part two is which of us? One thought I had, and I can't remember, to be honest, which two are on the housing committee? Who's on the housing committee?
It's you two.
Okay.
Yes.
Who knew? We just changed these a few weeks ago. I had the thought that the vice mayor being our Association of Bay Area Governments representative, it makes sense, since that's where these numbers are coming from, and we might have insight into what to expect. That would be one suggestion. Not that I'm just trying to find somebody other than myself. So, and I'm happy to do it also as the housing committee.
So moved.
But I'd be open. Is there any further discussion? There is a motion. Yeah, Vice Mayor.
Did you want to make a second? Does somebody want a second?
I
I'll
made the
second.
motion.
So before we vote,
Discussion?
yes, now I have a question. Could we do an alternate to this committee? Because, I mean, we are forming, right, a committee, sort of. I know it's a 2x2 by ever how many, but could there be an alternate?
I'll be the, if you want, I'll step up.
Yeah, so I would actually loop in the planning and building director here. Is the makeup set by the body once it's formed? Is that something that, I noticed the resolution itself doesn't specify the number that are going to it, so perhaps you can illuminate on that process.
So at a staff level, the suggestion was to nominate 2 members each. I don't know if any other jurisdictions are discussing whether an alternate be in place. The rules of the committee haven't been set, so we can make that as a recommendation. It will be made to the sub-regional committee after all the other jurisdictions have chosen theirs. I'm not sure if that'll be a problem or not.
Well, that's something we can address later.
I would say internally we can do that, and because the idea behind this is that they want 2 elected officials to be hearing, conveying, and working. So if somebody is missing, the idea is to ensure representation. And maybe if some other community feels this is a good idea, they can come back and add an alternative member to their body as well. And it's something we've seen interchangeably. The county moves Board of Supervisors people in and out of meetings with great frequency.
So I heard a motion and a second on the housing committee, which would be the vice mayor and myself, and I also heard a volunteer of Councilmember Durham. If we can say that we're going to include that if it's appropriate to have an alternate.
I'll be happy to make that friendly amendment.
Okay, and that second is acceptable?
That's good.
Any further discussion? All in favor,
Looky there.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? That passes unanimously. Good. There we go.
Yes.
No.
Okay, next up is our item on the Yountville Elementary School Commemorative Art Ad Hoc Committee. We're all about ad hoc committees here. So, welcome, Samantha.
Thank you. All about signing you guys up for more work. So if you recall, at the last meeting, we presented for feedback a commemorative sculpture idea commemorating Yountville Elementary School after its closure. And we received feedback from the council to establish a ad hoc committee of 7 members, 2 council members, 2 arts commission members, and then 3 members that would represent the elementary school, whether that's current, past presidents, or community members. And so we did have 1 council member excused at the last meeting, and the council asked to come back at this meeting to have you consider appointment of the 2 council members to that ad hoc. So that is before you this evening.
Thank you. Any questions?
No, I'm happy to make a motion.
Well, let's hold on. We
I see where that's
appreciate the eagerness. I'm guessing it's not yourself. Okay. Are there any questions of that report? Any member of the public like to speak Kim, anything? No?
Just one quick question. How many members were you looking to put on that committee?
7.
Okay, very good.
2 council, 2 Yountville Arts Commission, 3 school-appointed representatives. Okay, so no public comment on that. So Councilmember Mueller?
I'd like to make a motion that we nominate Councilmember Durham and Councilmember Dornbecker for this committee.
See what happens when you come back after absence?
It was a joy to watch the video last Tuesday, live web streaming on thetownofyountville.com if anybody else is interested in the future.
Thank you. So there's a motion
Second.
and a second. All in favor of the recommendation?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes. We have selected
Thank you.
our committee members.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Samantha.
Okay.
So we got here. If you're looking at the agenda, we are at the item for the proposed cannabis ordinance discussion. And before we get too far into it, just a few remarks about how it's going to go, because I know we have some people in here that have either never been in here or are here infrequently. So we will hear a staff report, as you've just been seeing on some of these other items. Hear a staff report because contrary to what some people have been told, the council has not been able to discuss this in its entirety ever before. The draft ordinance that's being presented to us tonight was just written, finalized last week by the town attorney. Only the vice mayor and I were part of the conversation at our standing committee meeting last week. I know some in the audience attended that meeting, but the rest of the council has only received this in tonight's meeting packet. So we need to present the content of this ordinance for consideration of the entire council. The same goes with the overlay zones. The vice mayor and I, as this standing committee, have worked with staff and some members of the public discussing these zones, and what we're talking about here is where we are recommending as a standing committee that if we proceed with this, and if you didn't hear that, I said if we proceed with this, where might a retail cannabis business be appropriate? And we have eliminated many parts of the town from our recommendation, and we have left with what is going to be presented tonight. So a reminder, and I've been saying this each of the last several meetings, we have not made a decision, even though some people think because we've put an ordinance together that you clearly have made up your mind. No, that's not true. And we'll say it again. We haven't made up our minds. This is the first meeting where we have an ordinance to even discuss or zones even to discuss as an entire council. It's appropriate that we put context to this idea before we take any action or even have opinions about the action. So that's what we're doing tonight. There's going to be no action tonight. There is going to be no action tonight. I've said that before, and it still seems to be confusing to some, but we are not acting on accepting the ordinance or the maps. We are still talking about it. And we're inviting all of you to talk about it with us like we always do. So we are not making any decisions tonight. We are hearing recommendations on language. And again, why have a draft ordinance? Because we need to know what we're going to discuss and what we're going to potentially say yes or no to. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. I've talked to some of you about an example of if somebody says they want to open a restaurant in town, we don't just say, okay, yes or no. We say, what kind of restaurant? Where might it be? What might you be trying to serve? What are your operational parameters? So we don't just in a vacuum make a decision, and we're not doing it any differently than we are here. So I don't think I can overstate that. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. A couple other things about just the process. If you haven't already signed up and you want to leave your email address, there's a form on the front table to ensure that you are on a mailing list for any future correspondence. You're always able to get that information off of our town website. It's always there, posted before you get into any of our meetings. We have a standing committee. We have no other meeting planned at this time for the standing committee. We're going to discuss as part of that tonight whether that standing committee is going to meet again, or might we only have the entire council to discuss this item going forward. That'll be part of what we do talk about tonight. The next possible date of continued discussion, the next possible date for continued discussion is February 18th. I will be out of town on February 4th, our next council meeting. So the next time we meet in a regular session will be not until February 18th. That is the next time we meet. That is not when we have said that we are going to take action, despite, again, what some of you have claimed and have decided that that's our plan. We don't have any plan set because we're just talking about it tonight. So, again, no action tonight. We're getting feedback. We're getting comments. So when you hear us talk about whether a zone makes sense or doesn't make sense, that doesn't mean we've decided. And if you hear us talk about language in the ordinance and we say that makes sense or doesn't make sense or clarify this or that, it's so we have the context that we can use to evaluate this in its entirety at some point in the future. And when I say evaluate, I mean evaluate. It does not mean that we have made any pre-decision as a council. We've taken an oath not to decide things ahead of time. We've taken an oath to come to every council meeting with an open mind. Yes, we might have some opinions, but we are not, by our oath, allowed to make an opinion without hearing all of the evidence and hearing all the public comment. And that's where we are tonight. So with that, I'll invite Sandra, we're hearing from you first, and we'll get an overview. I think we'll be hearing from our town attorney about the draft ordinance. And after we go through the ordinance language, because again, 3 of our council haven't even seen this until the meeting today, we will then talk, I think probably briefly, about the zones. I think that conversation has less content to consider. And after all that, that's when we sit here and we listen to all of you. A reminder that there is a 3-minute maximum time limit for public comment. We have a full house. We want to be respectful of everyone that's in here so that anyone that wants to speak can do so. You do not need to take all 3 minutes. And you're welcome to share your thoughts about this. What I ask, though, is you respect everyone else's opinion in the room, including ours, and we will do the same. So appreciate that you stay on the topic, and to the best of your ability, use facts. We realize that for many people it's an emotional discussion, which is why we want to take it very seriously and be very thorough about it. But I just ask that you all respect your neighbors and friends and colleagues that are here in the room. So with all of that set up, I'll invite staff to begin the presentation of the material, and the Vice Mayor and I may add comments, questions, having been on the standing committee and seen some of this before, but there have been modifications from what we saw last week based on some of our feedback, and now we'll have that presented to the rest of the council and to all of you. So enough of me. Go ahead.
Good evening. Tonight you have before you a draft ordinance and a draft resolution that may allow cannabis businesses here in town. It is the result of feedback that we've received from the town council and the cannabis standing committee over the last 2 years. And as the mayor mentions, it presents a draft that you can critique, give feedback on. That's what staff is looking for tonight. It was drafted by the town attorney, so he's available to go into any of the details on the ordinance. But I did want to touch upon some of the major points. As drafted, the ordinance would set up a dual regulatory scheme for one cannabis retail business in town. And at the last meeting in December, the term was used cannabis plus. And that's because it would require some level of secondary operation, whether that be retail that's separate and apart from cannabis, a spa, or something undefined that we haven't heard of yet. And it isn't defined in the ordinance, and it allows the creativity of an operator if that's the direction this ordinance takes. The dual regulatory scheme means that it would require both the use permit, and that's something that runs with the land, but also a regulatory permit that is renewed annually. And the council could decide not to approve that renewal of the regulatory permit for any number of reasons, and the town attorney can go into more detail about that. Without the regulatory agreement, the business would be in violation of the use permit that requires that that be part of the operations. There are a number of operational requirements that are included in the ordinance, and these speak to such things as a cannabis product not being visible from the exterior of the building and not being stored outside, that any delivery and loading and unloading zones must be secured, that those under 21 may not enter the business and may not work for the business. There's requirements for odor control. There are many others that I'm not noting here. The ordinance also requires that the business implement security measures. The ordinance would allow on-site consumption, but it would not be an appointment off the street. It would be, it wouldn't be for someone coming off the street, but by appointment. It would allow delivery of the products that are originating in town, in addition to those from outside of town. And that is the ordinance that the main elements of the ordinance that would amend Title IX of the town's municipal code, and that's on public peace and welfare. And that ordinance currently prohibits cannabis businesses. The ordinance also amends Title 17, which is the zoning ordinance, and it would establish an overlay zone where the businesses could be allowed. We've printed 5 different maps on both of these different boards that show different segments of the community where it may or may not go, and it's up for discussion tonight. Also included is a resolution that includes such things as the application requirements, the fees, the requirement for renewal, and it really sets the implementing standards of Title IX. And that is what is before you tonight. We hope that providing some level of detail gives you something to discuss, to give feedback on, and that we will take that feedback and may or may not come before you at a future meeting.
Thank you. Do we want to go straight to you, Gary?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, any initial questions from the council? Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I will give a brief overview, and we'll touch on some of the things that Sandra touched on, and then happy to answer any questions once I go through the overview. First, a state license is required for anyone to operate a cannabis retail business as that term's defined within the ordinance. That's a prerequisite before they can open up shop here in town. In addition to that, the proposed ordinance requires 2 types of permits. First is a regulatory permit, or a cannabis retail permit as it's called in the ordinance, and then also a use permit, which is what's typically required for all of the businesses here in town within your business zoning districts. Importantly, the ordinance requires as a condition of the use permit that a valid regulatory permit also be in effect for that location. And as you know, an operator has to comply with all conditions in a use permit in order to operate lawfully. So the regulatory permit issues for a 12-month period. It's a condition of the use permit to have the regulatory permit. There is discretion on the requirements and issuance of regulatory permits that's required for them to operate lawfully under their use permit. That's how this ordinance is currently drafted before you, and it's similar to what other cities and jurisdictions are doing in the state of California. The ordinance as drafted authorizes the sale, delivery, and/or on-site consumption of cannabis, as that term is defined in state law, cannabis products, which are those things derived from cannabis, 3 specific plants named in state law, and that includes things like edibles and concentrates and the like. On-site consumption, which I mentioned, and then also delivery originating from the location here within town. As you know, after Prop 64 was passed in 2016, the council considered an ordinance at that time. Ultimately, delivery originating outside of town was also allowed, or inside of town was allowed technically under the ordinance, but that would require a retail operation here in town, which doesn't exist under the current scheme. So practically speaking, deliveries from outside of town were allowed there. That same language that has previously been before the council and approved has been included wholesale within this. So there's a scheme now that would allow delivery from the location authorized in town. You still maintain the delivery from outside of town as well. The other holdover from the current municipal code is the personal cultivation that's allowed per residence. Per the ordinance, that's required indoors, and there's other requirements, no more than 6 plants or 50 square feet of space. Prop 64 allows this and removes the authority of the town to regulate that any further than it has. You've adopted reasonable regulations, which Prop 64 allows, but up to 6 plants per residence is required. All right, so the current ordinance allows the town council to adopt regulations and various fees for applications, permits, and renewal applications. So in addition to the ordinance that's in front of you, there's a draft resolution which accomplishes that. It imposes fees for applications and permits and renewals and adopts regulations that flesh out how the applications will be received and reviewed, and how those applications will be scored. Scoring criteria is draft and can be revised. Ultimately, though, whichever application receives the highest score is the one that will be offered the permit first. If that applicant does not want the permit, it is then offered to the next highest scored application, and so on until a permit is issued. That's the current draft that's before you, and of course, I'm happy to make any further revisions that the council would like.
Thank you. We'll start with questions about the draft ordinance. Are there questions from council to Gary? Yes, Councilmember Durham.
Thank you very much. Can you speak to issues that you have seen with other municipalities with in-house processes with the application and the screening? Do you I'll
Sure.
lead you. I'll give you my leading question.
Go ahead.
Has that been an issue that's been played out in court already?
Yes, is the short answer. There have been suits filed over selection criteria and the process for selecting applicants. And there are ways to minimize that, including using a third party to evaluate applications and go through the selection. Some cities have chosen processes that are more like a lottery and take out some of the discretion at that level. There are different ways to do it. The current draft in front of you, the selection criteria are objective, which is in contrast to some of the ones that have been challenged. So this is essentially a yes-no question. If the answer is yes, the applicant gets the points. If the answer is no, the applicant does not. That is in contrast to a system that would allow a subjective point system up to 10 points, for example, if you have this, and then you give the applicant 8 or 7 instead of 10. So these are drafted in an objective way to address some of those issues that have been done. But yeah, some cities have hired outside third-party companies to evaluate the applications and score them, and that can lead to a process where someone who isn't seen as having the same interest performs that task.
Thank you.
Any questions at this time, Councilmember Dornbecker?
Not at this time.
Councilmember Mueller?
Thank you, Mr. Bell. I have a question under definitions as it relates to the very first one regarding cannabis,
Yes.
cannabis accessories, concentrates, products, etc. What I see that's not here is the word hemp, and I'm sure you're familiar not only with the state definition but also with the definition in the 2018 Farm Act. And so I'd like for you to comment on that, but first, since it is not only THC we're talking about, but we're also talking about CBD, cannabidiol. So, and that is my understanding that it can be certainly extracted from cannabis, but it can also, it's also in very high quantities in hemp, which is very low in THC. So can you just give me your thoughts on why that wasn't included, or would that be cover more if we included that in the definition?
And before you answer that, if you could, just for the audience, explain CBD and THC.
Sure. Yeah, so CBD is the non-psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, and THC is the psychoactive ingredient that we typically refer to as getting someone high or having the effect of cannabis. To answer Councilmember Muller's question, the definition of cannabis in state law, and this ordinance incorporates by reference the definitions from state law that are used to issue the state licenses. So it's intentional that those are the definitions that are going to apply to the state license. They'll need a state license to operate, so it makes sense from a drafting and enforcement perspective to use those same definitions. The term cannabis, as incorporated and used in state law, specifically excludes industrial hemp from its definition. So industrial hemp is regulated under Food and Agriculture as a crop and not as under the Controlled Substances Act and not under the Adult and Medicinal Cannabis Use Act, which was recently adopted and consolidates and collapses the medicinal and adult use into a single regulatory scheme. So that's why it's not addressed in this ordinance, is that it has a separate regulatory scheme under state law and is regulated and tested in a different way. Some jurisdictions are choosing to ban the growing of industrial hemp at the same time that they're regulating this and adopting other similar regulations. The plants look very similar, so it can become an enforcement issue. So some cities and jurisdictions are attempting to address that through banning it. Does that answer the question?
Well, so I have a follow-on question. So if everything else in here was accepted, and if there was a retail store, could they sell hemp products?
Yes, and the reason for that is the federal farm bill, and actually more than a retail store could do so because federal law has legalized it under the farm bill that you referenced, and it's not regulated under this scheme in state law, which is why you're seeing an increase in CBD products at places like Target and CVS and places that clearly aren't regulated as what we would think of as an adult use cannabis store.
Okay, that's all for now.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you for the reports. I have some sort of overarching questions. I'd like to better understand the council's discretion in renewal of the regulatory permit piece, which
Sure.
is the 12-month permit.
Sure.
My understanding is we cannot just say no if the business is in compliance with everything. Rather, we would be able to say no in a different way by, for example, putting a moratorium on the renewal of all permits, or saying we no longer want to allow any cannabis business, so we would repeal this ordinance. Am I clear on that?
Yes, I would add to that, though, you could also amend the ordinance. So the regulatory permit is valid for 12 months. The way the ordinance is currently drafted, if a regulatory permit is issued and a use permit is also granted, assuming that the applicant is in full compliance with state law, the ordinance, any regulations adopted under the ordinance, and this council has not changed the ordinance, so changed the requirements, and they've been in compliance, the assumption is that the town council is okay with the scheme, they've complied with the law, the regulatory permit would issue again for another 12-month period. During that 12-month period, though, the council retains the authority to amend the ordinance and include new requirements, could place a moratorium or repeal the ordinance altogether, and then there would be no authority to reissue or renew because there wouldn't be a law in effect to do so. But yes, assuming no action's taken and they're complying with everything, the regulatory permit reissues.
Thank you. And then, am I correct that we would, through the use permit, or I guess maybe a regulatory permit too, but probably in our case a use permit, be able to have some say-so over a product mix? Or products that were sold and not sold? Like if we wanted to say no live plants or...
Yes, absolutely, yes. So in the same way that the council places conditions on a use permit for a restaurant and types of things that are sold and where and how and hours and how many employees and everything else, the same type of authority applies to a use permit here.
Thank you. And for clarity, we as a council last time decided that we wanted to see an ordinance with on-site consumption. But if we as a council were to say we want on-site consumption, those pieces would come out of this draft ordinance.
Yes, it could come out of the draft ordinance, or it could be prohibited through the use permit process. Either one.
And then there was a change to this ordinance, which we discussed at the committee level about the property line measurement. I just want to make sure that I am right on how you use the language. It's from the, let's take Yountville Community Park, for example, and the committee is recommending a 300-foot buffer around that. So it would measure from the 300-foot buffer to the closest point of where the business would be. How would that work? The closest kind of threw me.
Yeah. So the way that the buffer zone is currently drafted, there's defaults in state law, but the town can modify them. It incorporates the definition of premises from state law, which means the building where it's conducted and the part of a parcel, which may be less than the whole parcel, that the applicant has the right to occupy. And so it can be less than a parcel. A parcel means the whole legal boundaries of a particular piece of real property. This can be less than that. So if there is a single parcel and multiple tenants, the premises, for purposes of this ordinance, will be the physical building and any other part of that parcel where they have the legal right to occupy. And so the buffer is, as written right now, measured from the closest point of the other property that is we'll call the sensitive area, or the thing that it needs to be away from, whatever the closest line of that parcel, to the closest point of the premises.
And so if it's a premises where, let's say, the marketplace or Washington Square, it would be to the door of the business, from the sensitive area to the door of the business?
Yes, unless they have a legal right to occupy more of the parcel than just the building, as currently drafted.
Thank you. And then I think that I read in the ordinance that the town manager could put regulations in place. Is that, and then I thought I heard you say that actually the council would put the regulations in place. I'm not clear on how that fits together.
So there's both.
Okay.
Under the way this is currently drafted, there's both. You do have the authority to adopt regulations to implement this, and that's what the resolution does. There's also a limited authority for the town manager to adopt regulations on specific things, and that includes the amount of, so that I don't misquote it here, the maximum amount of cannabis products allowed on site, and the number or type of equipment allowed, and security measures. So that limited regulatory authority at the staff level is to address some operational issues that could come up during operation.
And if we, as a council, wanted to be able to do that, could we, if we wanted to reserve that to ourselves? I mean, I'm thinking specifically the amount of cannabis or the kind of security.
So it is also reserved to you already. And I'll give you the code section so that you will know what I'm talking about. It's under section 9.30.140, regulations and fees. The
If you
town.
could just pause for a second in case anyone in the audience is trying to find
sure.
that section. If you could repeat the number.
It is 9.30.140. And that authorizes the town council or your designee to establish all regulations necessary to implement the requirements and fulfill the policies of the chapter. Regulations have to be published on the website and shall have the same force and effect of a law. So there's this, which is very broad. It can be any regulation having to do with this at all. And there's a limited regulatory authority for the town manager for the specific things we just mentioned as well.
And then you talked some about the use permit, and we have some proposed amendments to our Chapter 17 of our
Yes.
municipal code.
Yes.
Is it possible that we could not go back to Chapter 17, but put in this particular ordinance what we want to see in a use permit for a cannabis retail business? To have it all in one place and specific to these businesses or this business?
So instead of amending the zoning code to put it into chapter 9.30?
I think we'd still have to, I'm more interested in the use permit requirements than the zoning. I think the zoning probably would have to stay separate, but for the actual use permit, like I know we referenced some chapter 17 as the general conditions of a use permit, could we put all of our use permit requirements in this one place?
Just so I understand the question, into this single
Yes,
ordinance?
Into 9, yes.
Into 9.
Put it into 9.
So state law says that there will be a zoning code, and the zoning code regulates land uses between parcels and within parcels and creates zones and allows those. So generally, anything that regulates how a parcel may be used or parcels is contained within a single zoning code. And regulations of business and how they operate are in various places in the code. So I think I'd recommend keeping it in the zoning code for that reason, but it can be expanded upon in the zoning code. This currently follows the format of how other use permits look for other uses. But you can add, these are the other mandatory conditions that will go in, or these are the other findings that the council will make, or other things like that.
And final question for now is, and this touches on what Councilmember Durham brought up, is the council making decisions about what business is best suited to get a license, how scoring occurs, what regulations should be in place. Do you feel that the ordinance as currently written gives council full flexibility and discretion while still protecting us from some of the things that you discussed with Councilmember Durham?
Yes.
Thank you.
I do.
Going back to the question about that section, was it 17 that you were addressing? Instead of trying to incorporate that content into the actual ordinance we're talking about here, couldn't you just make a copy of it basically and have it attached to any application that comes forward? I think the point was make sure they know all the requirements and rules in a Muni code without having to go find a Muni code.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
that would be something to not incorporate it necessarily in the language of this ordinance.
Yes.
It kind of achieves the same.
Yeah, the application in its form under the ordinance is created by the town manager, and that can certainly be included.
And I really don't have questions at this point because a lot of the red language in this draft have been in response to our conversations in the standing committee. A couple of things just to call out. We actually agreed that we remove some of the operational details like hours of operation suggested and some of those types of conditions. One, feeling that it didn't need to be in the ordinance, and two, it was very much up for discussion, and it would potentially depend on if we do this and find a spot, the particular spot might have an influence over what the conditions of use might be. So we didn't want to predetermine those like originally there was a 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., kind of a standard industry thing, but much of what we're talking about is not going to be standard industry stuff here. There are some questions that are listed in the staff report that were discussed very, very briefly at our last full council meeting. I don't really know that in most, if not all, of the cases, we really need to get this drilled down yet, to be honest. What I would like us to do, since not only is this the first time all 5 of us are sitting together hearing this, it's the first time many of you are hearing about this. So I think it's better if we hear your initial thoughts, questions, support, concerns, whatever it might be, so that we're also reacting to some of those things that you might want to bring up. So I'm not going to spend time right now on asking questions. I think I want to get to a very brief overview of the overlay zones so people understand what we're even talking about. And then we'll go ahead with public comment. And I'll also reference now, but I'll reference it again unless I forget. We've received several emails prior to today, prior to this meeting that we received throughout this process. But as recently as the last 2 days, we've received approximately, 20. 13 of those 20 are in support of a cannabis retail. 2 are opposed, and 5 are either opposed or supported based on some conditions. And an example of a condition would be no to what people would call a classic, and I've been trying to avoid using the term that's pretty outdated, but a dispensary. People still have, we have, 50 people in here, and we've got probably 40 different opinions about what that means. But using that as an example, people might say no to a dispensary where you buy a raw product, or no to on-site consumption, but we'd be open to CBD oils and lotions and things in a wellness spa setting. Well, we still need an ordinance. If you want a wellness spa and you have CBD oils, we still need an ordinance because it's still cannabis. So that's why we're going through it and haven't identified what type of retail business might be allowed. So just to set a little more, again, you're going to hear me talk about context over and over again tonight, and that's a little more context. Could you just explain again for the audience why we're talking about a regulatory permit and a conditional use permit? Typically, we don't do that.
Right.
And typically, we don't worry about regulatory permits. So if you could just explain generally why we're doing that and what the ramifications are. I think one of them, the Vice Mayor has touched on tonight and prior, the ability for us to control how long that permit is valid. If we say yes, and this happens, and somebody complies with all the rules we put down, but we realize it's just not right, what our authority and options are as it relates to those 2 permits.
So there's 2 primary differences between a regulatory permit and a use permit. A regulatory permit includes all of the requirements up front, or includes requirements up front, and that's what this proposed ordinance does. There's operating requirements, application requirements, who can own the business, how the applications are processed and scored. A use permit includes requirements as conditions after the application is granted on the other side, and is site-specific and applies to that specific business. So regulatory permits, everyone. Use permit, that specific site. Front-loaded regulations versus regulations on when the permit is issued. Those are the big differences between the 2. The next is a regulatory permit is only good for a 12-month period. And so if the town council were to decide to issue a moratorium on these permits, they wouldn't be issued again. Without the regulatory permit, the use permit would not be able, you wouldn't be able to comply with the requirements of the use permit, and in effect would not be able to operate lawfully within the town. It also allows the council to change the requirements for a regulatory permit in the future. Since this is an ordinance that can be changed by the council by adopting a new ordinance or amending it, the operational requirements could change, and those would apply when the regulatory permit is reissued. The basis for not renewing it could be changed, all of those things. So that continues to give the council excuse me, the discretion to change the requirements for the regulatory permit, decide whether or not one will be issued or renewed, and allows much more flexibility than a use permit, which, as you know, runs with the land and is much more difficult to revoke.
Thank you. What I want to do now is, based on some of the conversations that I've had directly, other council members have heard from members of the public, I'm sure. I will invite the council to consider, before we go to the zoning and then public comment, to consider whether we think we are, and maybe it's premature tonight, we have to get through more conversation about the February 18th meeting, because I know I've heard from some folks who say, we have to do something now because you're going to vote on the 18th. And despite the many times I've said we have not committed to any action at any particular time, some of you don't believe me. That's what it comes down to, unfortunately. So I wanted to entertain that for the council, because we haven't been able to talk about it. And if we want to commit to continued conversation on February 18th, but no action on the 18th, I throw that out for consideration. I think that would give some people comfort that are ready to try to fight this idea starting tomorrow morning. Even though we have no context yet. There we go again. So, for consideration, how does the council feel about, yes, Councilmember Dornbecker.
On February the 18th, I have a medical procedure that may preclude me from attending that council meeting.
Well, there you go.
I thought I'd just better tell you right now.
Way to book a doctor's appointment.
Well, it's something that,
No, I understand.
Shall I go into detail?
No. So even with just that consideration, I'm not here on the 4th. I'm in Washington, D.C. Sounds like at least one of our council members is not available on the 18th. We will not be deciding this without a full council present. So I think that may decide it for us that we're committed to having a full council present to continue this conversation after this, unless, of course, it's in a standing subcommittee context. So we're telling you, because I know some of you, if we aren't explicit, we are not going to act on it on February 18th either. Okay? Do I need to repeat that? Because I've said it before, and I'm saying it again. So no action February 18th, no action February 4th, no action tonight. There's no guaranteed action after February 18th either. It depends on how we proceed. The next regular scheduled meeting would be March 3rd. Put that all on your phones now if you'd like. No guarantee that it's agendized that night, and no guarantee if it's agendized it's going to be an action item. That's to be determined over the next several weeks. And also with the feedback we get tonight. So with that, let's go to the zoning map just for some presentation and context about the overlay zones. Thank you.
The 5 different zones are shown here, and I will refer to both of the bulletin boards. The top left represents the west side of Washington Street and includes the primary commercial and the Old Town commercial zoning districts, as well as the public facilities zoning district to the west of the highway. The next one is beneath it, and that is the Old Town commercial zoning district on the east side of Washington Street, generally I believe between Padrone to the south and Madison to the north. The third district is shown in the middle, and it's known as the Y or the V, and it's the residential scaled commercial zoning district that's bounded by Yount Street, Washington Street, and Humboldt, with the exception of a corner that's carved out that's residential. The fourth one is the upper right, and that shows the residential scaled commercial district between Mulberry and Mission Streets. And the final one is shown on the bottom right, and that is the planned development zone to the east of Washington and south of Mission, and that's generally the Hotel Yountville property. So they go from north to south, and they encompass the different commercial zoning districts in town. You can choose one or more of these if you're interested, or none at all.
Or I would also say you may have the option, for example, the residential scale commercial zone between Mulberry and Mission could be adjusted at Oak Circle, for example, if you wanted to make that into a smaller section.
Yeah, these are not all or nothing zones.
Correct.
That's for us to discuss. We've eliminated everything else from our recommendation. We also don't agree entirely, even within these zones, where we would be comfortable with consideration.
And I think, right, that's why staff is presenting them this way. They're basically a build upon or a strikeout. But I did want to clarify on the Mulberry to Mission, that you do have the option of cutting that at.
We have the
at
option
Oak
of
Circle.
cutting any of these to a size that we're comfortable with. I think, Vice Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, we agree to present all of these zones as they are presented, with the exception of the zones, basically the residential scale commercial, but things on the east side of Washington Street is, I think, principally, if not exclusively, where we differ. I continue to consider those, the Vice Mayor, as opposed to anything on the east side of Washington. Fair to say? Okay. So that's just where we are at this point. Otherwise, we present the ordinance in these maps as described for questions and then discussion. So, Councilmember Mueller?
I think what I have is a comment here. It was in one of our letters to us in terms of our consideration of this topic. And it seems to be a bit of a hybrid of what we're talking about, so I wanted to kind of throw it out there. This letter says, to the end about, selecting a site, if we were going to have that discussion, and only one possible licensee, we've got a pretty small town. So what they were suggesting, I thought, is worth throwing on the table as well. It says that once the winning operator has been chosen, assuming that we go there, they would then be required to present one or more sites, so we could perhaps narrow them down, to the town council to gain final approval. This would allow the council to choose both the operator and the site. And they propose that the alternative is a scenario in which the town might choose a suboptimal operator that fits our ideal location, or an ideal operator in a suboptimal location. So I just think that is a very interesting hybrid to kind of not keep them necessarily totally delinked, but it could be something that we could link within our selection of an operator if that decision is made. So just an extra consideration.
Okay, thank you. Other questions about the zoning maps as presented? I think one of the challenges about finding a location is we don't control any of this property we're talking about. And my guess is most or either all or most of any potential applicants don't. Maybe some of you out there own the property and control it and would apply, but I think often it's going to be something that needs to be worked out between an applicant and a property owner. Whether that happens in multiple locations or not, I'm not sure that we don't typically get into that part of the business, finding a space, but it's certainly something that we can consider going forward. Councilmember Durham?
If I might, the understanding is that's part of the screening application process. We're not a part of that. The understanding is that as part of that application, they come to us with a master lease proposal or a signed offer for that property. But the idea is that they have taken care of it and they're awarded points for that position in having that lease or that purchase option for the process, for the property, but it's part of the application and the screening. It's not from our input. It's part of the numbering system.
Okay,
Yeah, and I would just add to that, even under the scheme as described, where there'd be multiple locations and there would be some discretion on the council on where it would ultimately go, the use would still need to be authorized in the underlying parcel. And right now, cannabis is not an authorized use anywhere. So it would have to be approved in the zone where the sites would be located, or in an overlay zone where it would be in multiple current zones where it would be allowed. And then from within that zone, come and apply for or suggest or propose multiple sites that the council could choose. So this process would still be required.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go to public comment on the draft ordinance and the draft maps?
Well, I have one maybe that staff, or I'll let anybody who would like. the comment that I heard frequently was that there was a survey done. I'd like staff to address that survey, and that because of the survey that we decided not to approve anything. So I think we're going to probably hear some public comment about that. So I'd like to have staff just throw out, give us a little history on the background of that and what the result of that was, and
Sure.
how it came about and what happened.
So I guess there are two sets of results that I'd like to share with you. One is the one you're asking for, and it was a survey that was created about 2 years ago when the council was trying to gauge whether there was interest in cannabis. The survey asked questions as to personal cultivation, commercial cultivation, retail businesses, as well as medicinal businesses. And there were 206 participants of that survey.
So before you go further, let me clarify. There were 206 responses. And let's be
Yes,
clear.
that's just what I was getting at. We don't.
There was not a limit.
Right.
Somebody could have responded multiple times.
Yes,
So
it was an online survey, and I was just getting to that,
Okay.
that an individual could do multiple responses. We don't have a way of tracking that information. We just know that there were responses, not participants.
And just to add to that, there was not a council direction to have that survey, or was it?
I believe it came out of a council interest. Wasn't that right, Steve?
Here, let me it was to provide information for the council to use. It was not a definitive course of action in itself. Because at that point, if you may recall, the town still banned delivery. And so there was a variety of information. It was an information survey to gauge, and what I would say, like any survey, it gauges the responses from the number of people that participated at that point in time. So in this particular case, to kind of finish what I think Sandra was going to say, 58% of the 206 respondents indicated that they weren't interested in cannabis retail.
Go ahead.
Which is how many people exactly? Not a percentage. What's the count?
112.
121.
Or 121. Do we know if those were all residents?
We don't.
So it could have been anybody.
Correct, and it could have been multiple respondents. And I think, Sandra, you were also going to share the results of the election.
We've been asked about that information, so I have that handy. Of the 2,034 registered voters, there was an 82% turnout, of which 58% were voted for the laws to allow cannabis.
And how many people was that in numbers?
976.
I think it was 1,600.
And 77 ballots were cast.
It was 1,677 voted in Yountville, which is an 82.5% voter turnout.
Right. And because of the way this is brought up, I'm going to add a little context to it as well. Again, here I go. And I've talked to a number of you about this. As Steve just pointed out, the Prop 64 legalization was out of context for what we're talking about today. It was a moment in time years ago. The survey that people have been bringing up from April of 2018 was a moment in time also without context, because we didn't know over 2 years ago the variety of business types that we could consider. There was very little understanding of the difference between medical and recreational, between CBD and THC, what could be infused, what can't be infused, how it can be used. So I've told people both of those on their own does not provide enough information for me personally to base a decision. It's data included with a lot of other data that goes into what we should consider. So yes, you can count on people bringing up the survey tonight, and you can count on people talking about having another survey. The council can consider options to do that, to figure out if there is a way that we can get even further input. But the challenge there is to have accurate and verifiable input, not random input, because it would not be fair to either side of the conversation if we couldn't really trust the results. So, did you have anything further about that,
Nope, thank you for addressing
Councilmember
that.
Dornbecker?
Yes, I was wondering, was that 2018 survey part of the Envision Yountville process?
No, I
No,
don't think
it
so.
was
That
when
was a separate.
Councilmember Durham and I were the original ad hoc cannabis committee. And in connection with the workshop we did and some of the other education we went through, we put the survey together.
I see.
Nathan Still, the town staff, put the survey together. The council didn't put the survey together.
And during the Envision Yountville process for the update to the general plan, was cannabis discussed?
In relation to some parcels, yes. For example, the two vacant parcels on Humboldt, but otherwise, no, there was not a lot of discussion and certainly no consensus as part of that.
Thank you.
There was some feedback at different meetings, and it depended on the audience that night about how much was shared, I think, about pro and con for cannabis. Nothing formal. I don't even remember if we had those clickers that were taking a poll of the people present. I don't remember if there was anything specifically asked about that. I don't think so.
No, it was more generally office or retail categories of uses the community would like or not.
Well, as you remember, some of those meetings, we were discouraged from attending, so I didn't know the answer, so thank you.
And certainly not participating in if we were there, yeah.
Yeah, I'll participate.
Okay. Were there any other questions from the council to staff about the material presented before we go to public comment? So again, just for consideration, I know we're going to get a question asked about doing another polls, survey, whatever you want to call it, of the community and how that might happen. So I know some folks out in the audience are going to have ideas of how that might happen. So we're open to hearing that. I think Mr. Pinkert is up and ready to go. So you sat in the back of the room, you should have sat in the front. But there you go. So in that case, considering that, again, Warren, I'll invite you to come forward and be the first speaker. I do just want to reiterate 13 emails in support, 2 emails opposed, 5 conditional. This is not the entire list of emailed responses. Again, previous meetings we had many residents, assuming not all residents, we had many people email the council. All of those emails are forwarded to Michelle to be included in the public record. You're welcome to go back to previous meetings, either the standing committee meeting that we held about a week ago on a Friday, or the previous town council regular meeting where we discussed this, to find some of those other responses either for or against this conversation. So, Mr. Pinkert, please. And again, we're going to have a timer for up to 3 minutes. Don't feel obligated to take all 3. We do have a lot of folks, I think, that want to speak tonight, so we'll respect everybody's time. So welcome.
I thought your state of the town was well done, John.
Thank you. Let's restart his clock. That was good.
I'm not here to talk about pros or cons of cannabis. I'm talking about getting a feel for what your constituents really want. And as a result, there's a growing number of people here in Yountville that have decided to put a survey together to begin to try and get some who's for it and who's against it information. The survey is meant to be unbiased. It is a simple answer, yes or no, and it is a simple question. Do you want retail cannabis / marijuana dispensary? And I know John and I talked today about that. Okay, so that is what it is currently in Yountville. And the reason we're undertaking this is because there's been no communication from the council as to whether they would undertake finding out what their constituents want. And so we're just kind of filling that vacuum. And so we believe that everybody in the city should be heard, whether you're pro or you're con. And I think that way it gives you a better feeling for whether your constituents are for it or against it. I have here, there's a possible vote on this issue, February 18th. That's no longer the case. So we feel good there's a little more time because we were feeling that we were working against the February 18th deadline, because you could have voted, even if you say you might not and you probably won't, you could have voted on the 18th of February to implement this. So we felt we had a real hard stop there that we had to work against. That hard stop is gone, so we might be able to rethink this, and we would like to get input for the right questions to ask, but we don't want to wait until we feel like we're up against another hard stop. So the sooner that we can get engaged to get the right question, the better off, I think the process will be. And we plan to share our results with you guys and also with the citizens of the town.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Dornbecker has a question.
Yes, please, Mr. Pinkert, how do you propose to, what is the procedure that you're going to use to take this poll?
We have a map of the city, and we have divided it up into sections, and people, some here, are going door to door with a questionnaire that just has the question, has the name, address, and signature of the person, whether they're a resident or non-resident. And if they're not home, we're leaving a, we missed you flyer on the door, not in the mailbox, Steve.
It's illegal.
And so you have already begun this process?
We're ready to go.
But did you say you wanted feedback on other questions to ask?
We could.
Oh, well, I thought that's what you said earlier, excuse me.
Yeah.
If I can
My
explain, just based on our previous conversation, this group, I believe, not wanting to speak for you, but they were going to mobilize immediately with their assumption that action was going to potentially happen on February 18th. That deadline, which never existed, really doesn't exist. And so that's why I think Mr. Pinkert is saying that there may be some flexibility in how this rolls out.
I can contact the group. I cannot speak for them, okay? But I can contact the group and see and take their temperature and see, if they're willing to wait. But we've got to get engaged.
Thank you.
Can you tell me how you're going to verify all the responses and validate them? Are you going to?
What do you mean validate?
Who are you talking to? Are they residents of Yountville?
No, we're not
voters. Is there any?
No. But we're going to take them at their word. I mean, it's not a scientific study. Okay, it's the person who's in the house. We'll ask if they're a resident or not, and they'll sign their name, okay, and print their name and their address, and that's what we'll use.
Okay. Thank
and
you.
We intend to go to the businesses also because the Chamber of Commerce has not formally polled the owners of the businesses in the town, whether they support or not. So we intend also to do that, and also to mail the non-resident, the second homeowners, with their addresses to get input back from them.
And do you have a plan?
Am I over my time?
We're asking you questions now, so we have no time limit. How do you propose to ask the town residents that live at the Veterans Home, or do you?
We were not. That since it's a federal facility.
State facility.
State.
Or state, you know, we didn't think that it would take too much time. I mean, we certainly could, and we're not against it.
Just point of reference, they're a third of the population in Yountville.
Yeah,
And
I
so
know.
if it goes unsurveyed or polled, then you've already eliminated a third of the population from opinion, even though there are state regulations about their access. That's a different personal issue for the residents there.
Right.
So
But we have talked to residents there, but we weren't going to poll them.
I would not go up there without authorization from the administration. They probably would not welcome this, but
We meet them down here.
just pointing out that while a third of our population lives on that campus, there are restrictions on how you can approach them if you were going to do it.
Yeah, no, we weren't going to go and start surveying without going through the proper channels there.
Okay,
Good.
thank you.
I have
Oh, yes.
one question. What was your plan regarding privacy issues? Once this was complete, is it, will be shared with everybody, or internally you'll add up all the votes and give us information, or had you not gotten that far yet?
Well, we weren't going to share who voted how. We were going to, and this is something that I was going to work with Steve on, is the best way to put that survey together to give to you. Okay, and how to slice and dice it. You know, if you took the VA, we could say that in the VA there was, you know, yes and no, this percentage. Business owners, there was this percentage. We could, you know, we'd try and collect it so that we could arrange it and give it to you with no names, but supported by names.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, welcome, Kim.
Hi, Kimberly Cook, resident of Yountville. And as you mentioned, John, Mayor Dunbar, this is an emotional issue. There's a lot of voices that we're hearing everywhere. There's surveys that have been done, petitions that are to be done, questions about everything. I think the proper way to address all these concerns and answer the questions of residents that they have would be to suspend forward movement on this and put it on the November ballot for a clear yes or no vote. Then the residents of Yountville can believe that they've been heard. And with that information, either yes or no, the town council can move forward to carry out the wishes of the people that they represent with full understanding of what that really is. It answers all the questions of who and when and how. So that's my thought.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to just ask, you can sit, thank you, Kim. Gary and or Steve, but we have discussed this as an option, and to give, you know what I'm going to say, context to a ballot measure, could you explain how that might go about, what generally the timing of something like that, and also the cost of something like that, with or without a municipal election?
Sure. So the town council can propose an ordinance and place it on the local ballot. It's a ballot measure when it's done at the local level, an initiative when it's done at the state level. That ordinance, if approved, would go into effect immediately or at a later date designated in the ordinance. The process for that is the council would adopt a resolution with the text of the ordinance, call the election. It could be held as a standalone or consolidated with the general municipal election. It is more cost effective to consolidate it because there's already an election that's going to occur on November 3rd. It's too late to make it on the March ballot, given the timing. So that would be the November 3rd, 2020 election. The cost of running that election, I think, and Michelle might have a better sense of the numbers for me, it's somewhere around $15,000, I think, generally, and I think it will be nominally more to include this because you're already holding an election.
And to follow.
Hold on just a second, Steve.
And I could reach out to the registrar's office to get what an approximate estimate would be to add to our $15,000 budget that we already have in place.
And so I think in the past it's been somewhere between 15 and 20,000, and that's if it's all by itself or if for some reason there was not a challenged election, then this would be the only thing on there that would be at that same price of around 15,000. But if it's in addition to a contested local election, then that would be fairly nominal to add, is what you were saying, I believe.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
The other thing I do, just to follow your phrase of the night, context, it would be very similar to the initiative the council put on the last election related to Measure S to increase the TOT for the affordable housing program. Same process. Council wrote the enabling ordinance, put it on, the folks voted, and then it was implemented following the vote. So same type of thing. Everybody would be familiar to that in terms of similar approach.
And it would be majority vote required.
50% plus one.
Yeah.
I have one quick question.
Yes, Councilmember Mueller and then Vice Mayor.
So since it's late January, do we know anything about timelines right now that would be important to consider? I see the
Yes.
town manager.
There will be a couple of things that we'll fine tune with the chief election officer, which is the county, but we principally want to have this finalized and a decision made not much later than end of June in order to have everything done to meet the.
And that's final decision, wording?
Yep.
That's kind of, okay.
So no later than June 16, I think, Michelle, before your microphone
Yeah.
is on.
Yes, before June 16th. And then I can confirm with the county registrar again on that date. Some of the dates are subject to their timeline, and so we reach out to them.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the statement, Kimberly. Yeah, Vice Mayor, you had a question, sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Bell,
Yes.
so there is a procedure you just described where council can put something on the ballot. Is there an initiative where residents or citizens can put something on the ballot?
Yes, that is the only other way to do it.
Okay. Would you describe that, please?
Sure. So there's a process working with the town's elections official under the election code, which is the town clerk, Michelle. The process is to submit a proposal with a brief description and the language of the ordinance. Once it's cleared for circulation, and that's a process that has to do with Michelle and working with the county and clearing it, and there's requirements in the elections code. Once it's cleared, there's a certain amount of time for signatures to be gathered. Those signatures can be gathered from any registered voter here in town. There's a threshold for initiatives, which I believe is 15%, unless it's a tax, and then it's 5%. So it's a lower threshold for a tax. If those signatures are gathered within the time frame, they're submitted back to the town clerk. Town clerk then verifies that the signatures are valid and that the threshold's been met. At that point, it comes back to the council. The council has three options once it comes to you. Place it on the next general election ballot, which would be the November 3rd, 2020. Call a standalone special election to hear it, which would be more expensive and the other things we just discussed. Or direct staff to conduct a 30-day report and report back to the council. You can have staff analyze whatever you'd like within that 30-day period. And then once you receive the report, place it on the ballot or call a special election to do that. You can also simply adopt it, unless it's a tax, which would need voter approval no matter what. But if it's an ordinance that doesn't impose a tax, one option is to simply adopt it and not put it on the ballot at all.
And part of that process is an ordinance would be brought forward, actual ordinance language would be brought forward by the proponents, by our residents and citizens.
That's correct. Yes, the actual language proposed by them would need to be included when signatures are gathered and would come before the council to call an election on it or be adopted.
So for clarity, if it's a non-tax, if it's more in alignment with is an ordinance appropriate or not, it could be worded either positively or negatively. So it could either be don't do it or do it.
Correct.
Okay. And then do you know what, so 15% of registered voters by a certain date, is that what?
Yeah, so it's...
We're really working on you here, Michelle. You weren't ready for election law tonight, were you?
It's a test.
So it's 15% of those who voted in the last gubernatorial election, the last governor's election, which would be the November 18 election. So it's the percentage of that. So you figured out the total number of people who voted in that election, fine, 15% of it, that's the minimum to get it on. And then, of course, it's 5% if it's a tax, so it's lower.
Right. Okay. So were there any other questions about that particular statement? Okay. Who's next from the public? Yes. You did look ready.
I did. My name is Bill Wright. I'm a resident. And the first thing I want to say is thank you. You have done a phenomenal job building a special town. I mean, I don't go a day where I don't pinch myself and think this is just the greatest place in the world. And I know you all have done a lot to make that happen. And John, to your Peloton comment, my wife and I were up in Banff 2 years ago, and I was watching TV, and I saw this volunteer fireman made out of brass with a water fountain around it. And I looked at it and I go, wow, that looks familiar. And below it said, if you can answer this question, you could win a prize. I fell out of my chair trying to get to the TV and say, I know where that's at. That's Yountville. And that was in Banff. So, you know, this town has a lot of reach, a lot of people.
So what did you win?
I didn't win. I couldn't get into the code. So, you know. But anyway, what I want to do is talk about, you know, some issues regarding this as far as I am concerned. But I am very concerned about that people have a financial interest in selling cannabis, marijuana type products in this town, and they don't have an interest in the culture and what's been invested in this town. And so let me just talk about some of the big issues. The first one I want to talk about is the veterans. When I think about cannabis, I went back and did a Google Map study, and I looked at all the places where in Northern California they have dispensaries and all the places where we have Veterans Administration's facilities. And Yountville came out as the place that would have the closest cannabis dispensary, in part because the town's not that big, to any VA facility in as far as I know, California. And we all know that it is against the law, federal law, to use, possess marijuana or prohibit at all VA medical centers, locations, and grounds. When you are on VA grounds, it's federal law that precedes state law. The other is employees of the VA, including those who are veterans receiving VHA care, are prohibited from using Schedule I drugs. So the close proximity of the VA facility to Yountville creates an environment where I feel that people are at a greater risk of violating federal law. And in the case of people who are at the facilities, up at the VA facilities, they could lose their residency at that facility. Now, another issue came up is I went back and looked at information from the American Addiction Centers, and it shows that marijuana and PSD, there's a relationship between them, and cannabis use disorders has been the most diagnosed substance use disorder among veterans since 2009. In 2002, about 13% of the veterans who suffered from PSD had a co-occurrence of marijuana addiction, while in 2014, the percentage rose to a little less than 23%. And in the study, they talk about toxicity, intoxicated, suffering from cravings, struggling with aggression and fear, makes it much harder for people struggling with co-occurring PSD and marijuana addiction to hold down a job, to maintain a healthy relationship. And this isolation in turn can enhance PSD symptoms, leading to further drug-seeking behavior and paranoia.
And you've gone over your 3 minutes, Bill, so I know
I
went
was
fast.
stealing hers.
I even gave you.
She went
I
a
even
little
gave
fast.
you a restart on the.
Okay, all right.
The whole volunteer firefighter sculpture thing.
I appreciate that.
But thank you for sharing your information with us tonight.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Again, to be fair to everybody that's here in the room, we want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak that would like to. So who's next? Yes, Mr. Donsker.
Hello, Bruce Donsker. Thank you for the information. Learned a lot in terms of expectations on timing. That helps a lot. One item that I have not heard a lot about that I think a lot of us are concerned about is a simple question, and that is, what are the potential unintended consequences of having cannabis in our town. And I know that will totally depend upon what the end product happens to be or what the sales happens to be. But to me, that is a question that if we asked people to talk about here, we'd get opinions and thoughts on that until the sun came up. But I agree with you, John, that the question needs to be based upon facts. And to me, there is an opportunity to gather facts in terms of what the unintentional consequences are from the towns around us that already have cannabis facilities. And I'm suggesting that maybe, while we have a little bit more time, we do a little homework in terms of, example, the police departments in each of these towns or the sheriff's departments in each of these towns, what have been their resources that have come up due to cannabis sales in their town before cannabis sales and after cannabis sales. I would also bet that town council, through the Freedom of Information Act, we could probably get access to the actual dispatches and nuisance complaints to the actual addresses where there are cannabis facilities. Maybe collect that data, not only for the facilities, but within that neighborhood. Take it for maybe all of last year and compare that to what we have in Yountville today. To me, it would be fascinating to see if there's a difference. Okay? In addition to that, everyone on council has counterparts on councils in other towns. Towns that have already approved a cannabis ordinance. Those people didn't stop thinking and learning the day they signed those ordinances. What have they learned since? What unintended consequences have they come up with that maybe we could learn from in terms of adapting our ordinance? And again, I realize that would depend upon what our product is. To me, the idea is answer that question, and then the second part is share that information. I think a lot of people would love to know what that information is through an insert in the Sun, through a website. Share that information, give us a chance to digest that information, maybe have one of our town workshops where we could go over that and incorporate that into the process. Because to me, coming to a conclusion and voting without knowing what the unintended consequences are is not something that I'd like to see happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just say, as we're waiting for our next speaker, Dennis, hold on just a second, if you could, please. Many of you have heard us talk about the League of California Cities and some of the other associations that we are a part of. This has been for 2 years at least, ongoing panel discussions that have involved potentially hundreds of jurisdictions involved in conversations and best practice learnings and worst practice learnings. We've all been absorbing that in different ways. It's kind of hard to measure those responses and put them down on paper. It's a wealth of background and research that we've all been doing, either together or independently. Rest assured that we've been doing that. There are a number of local jurisdictions in the Northern California Bay Area, not all big cities either, that people could go and either research on your own to also find out that information. We'll share as much as we can, clearly, but also understand what you're hearing from us. And in the documents that we've been discussing tonight, much of this is coming from those other jurisdictions. What they have learned to avoid, in some cases, city of, I want to say it was Novato, that for over a decade they've had this as an ordinance and had practices. Find out what's going on there. Are they a fair comparison? Then we get to debate about whether it's a fair comparison. But anyway, rest assured that we've been hearing and seeking out information from all kinds of different jurisdictions. So, Dennis, I'm sorry, yes, you were ready to go.
Dennis Keller. And I want to put in a record that Donsker was looking over my shoulder and completely stole my talking points.
That's okay.
And he's right. We should be looking at other jurisdictions, and I'm glad the sheriffs are here tonight. And maybe they can share with us whether the sheriff's department has done any kind of, or will do in the future, any kind of a risk assessment, a threat assessment onto what will possibly happen in the town of Yountville. How they're going to be involved in inspections and in control of any kind of a cannabis retail store.
Well, we went all the way to the undersheriff to bring in the big brass.
Excellent.
Is he still back there? Yes, he is.
Yes, he is.
See, he stops wearing a uniform. He's hard to spot in a crowd. And we have other members. So we're going to be hearing from at least one, if not more of them.
Yes, because as you know, my background, I dealt with in the early days of the marijuana dispensaries in Los Angeles, and there are significant spikes in crime. And so by using a threat assessment or risk assessment model, we'll be able to tell what's an acceptable amount of a spike in crime for the town of Yountville. People have to understand that this could happen. And maybe the undersheriff or the sheriff's department can explain that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I don't want to put you on the spot, Undersheriff, if you would like to come forward next to share some of your thoughts now, it might actually answer some other people's questions also. So, plus, it's always nice to have you back.
Thank you.
You haven't forgot us yet.
I have not. I will. Had a great time here for the brief period of time I was with you all. So, good evening to you, Mr. Mayor, and Ms. Vice Mayor, and the rest of you. So clearly, the topic of marijuana is or cannabis is one that is still sort of exploratory, if you will, in some ways. It's hard to say what will happen to address the question. Predicting the future is difficult. Yountville is particularly unique, I think. It'd be hard to find probably comparison cities or demographics. That being said, the sheriff's office, we don't really have a position on it. We're just, things that we would like to see addressed. Obviously, there's concerns from public safety issues. The marijuana industry, while it is regulated, there's there's issues obviously when or can be issues when dispensaries are opened. Marijuana tends to be primarily a cash industry. It's not always, but there's the Safe Banking Act that's making its way through Congress. It hasn't been passed, so that could change things. But many, unfortunately, when unscrupulous people see a target, they see a target, and businesses that are laden with cash money are technically an attractive target at times. And then there's potential for an increase in property crimes. There's a potential for an increase in robberies. We've certainly seen occasionally in the surrounding jurisdictions issues with invasion-type robberies or burglaries after hours, that sort of thing. So, again, we don't really have a position. It's really kind of up to you all to make the difficult decision with the input, obviously, of your constituency to decide what's appropriate for Yountville. We stand ready to support whatever the decision is, to continue doing what we like to do, which is serve the residents here and try to keep Yountville's residents and visitors as safe as they can be. So,
are you able to give us, again, I understand this is making drawing some conclusions, but can you compare it to alcohol? And since we are much more familiar with the conditions and potential impact of alcohol availability in retail businesses here in town, is there a correlation in terms of what you talk about with a potential change in behaviors and any kind of crime activity? Is it similar? Is it unique?
Yeah, so I don't know of any particular studies that have been done on the topic. Unfortunately, I can just tell you from my own experience that marijuana comes with a set of issues, not necessarily the same as alcohol or other Schedule I type, if you want to call them medications, methamphetamine, cocaine, that sort of thing. Obviously, the other illicit drugs. I guess I shouldn't say it's an illicit drug at this point. It's been legal, right? But in any event, there's other issues that I don't know that marijuana necessarily carries the same issues. But there is the issues of impaired driving, the issues of determining what impaired driving is. The field sobriety tests aren't necessarily, well, at least the presumptive tests aren't necessarily there yet. As we can do with alcohol, it's well documented. What a legal limit is, at what point you become impaired. There's mechanisms, actually mechanical, chemical tests we can do to determine what that legal limit would be. Marijuana doesn't have those same ones. particularly. So there's that issue.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other questions of the Undersheriff? Yes. Councilmember Durham, do you have a question? Any others? Councilmember Dornbecker?
Yes, I wanted to ask about, is there a correlation between, I know that alcohol removes or changes the inhibitions in a person. Do you know of anything about the difference between alcohol and cannabis in that regard?
Well, clearly it's an intoxicating substance, right? Just much as the other alcohol would be. So, again, I can say comfortably that it's a mood-altering drug. What happens when someone's mood becomes altered is, sort of based on a confluence of factors, you might say. So,
thank you.
Sure.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you can go over your 3 minutes. I'm not going to enforce that one. That was on us, I'm sure. Anyone else that doesn't have a weapon attached to their hip? You might, I don't know. Yes, welcome.
Hello, good evening. My name is Lorraine Wright. There's mounting scientific evidence that speaks to the real dangers of the consumption of marijuana. I would like to share with you some of those dangers tonight. What are marijuana edibles? Edibles are food products that have been infused with marijuana, TCH, such as baked goods, candies, chocolates, drinks, and lozenges. In a recent updated report from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, dated December 23, 2019, Dr. Nora Volkow, director of the Institute on Drug Abuse, cautions, and I quote, "Edibles are now being associated with medical complications that we never knew were associated with marijuana. Due to the delayed onset and uncertain potency of these edibles, many people who use these products may unintentionally consume excessive amount of THC. These individuals may exhibit self-harming behaviors or hurt others while in that state. Some of the more adverse effects associated with the consumption of edibles include drowsiness, confusion, vomiting, anxiety and panic attacks, agitation, psychotic episodes, hallucinations, paranoia, impaired motor ability, respiratory depression, heart problems ranging from irregular heartbeat to heart attack. How marijuana use can increase the risk for an alcohol overdose. According to a study from lead author Ann C. Fernandez, PhD, and I quote, "Marijuana seems to interact with alcohol in unique ways that still are not well understood. For example, there is evidence that alcohol combined with marijuana increases THC absorption. So by drinking alcohol, you actually end up with more THC in your blood than you would if you used marijuana alone." So she further noted, it is antiemetic, so it can prevent vomiting, thus keeping dangerous doses of alcohol in your body. Overdose risk. The most common drug used in combination with alcohol users who experience an alcohol overdose is marijuana. A study looked at 660 patients who had experienced alcohol poisoning, passing out, or blacking out events, and found only 20% have been using alcohol alone. Overconsumption is a significant risk. According to a published paper by Jaslyn Grewal and Lawrence Lowe, PhD, at the University of Toronto, Canada, although edibles are commonly viewed as safer and more desirable alternative to smoked or vaped cannabis, physicians and the public should be aware of several risks related to the use of cannabis edibles. One risk is that, unlike, for instance, smoking cannabis, consuming edibles can take much longer, up to 4 hours, to produce an effect. This delay could lead to some people, especially those who are new to the drug, to increase their portion, resulting in overconsumption.
And Lorraine, if you could just please wrap up,
Okay, thank you.
time.
The effect on cannabis from edibles can last up to 8 hours or even longer, which lengthens the duration of impaired judgment. I ask everyone here tonight, would we risk the safety, well-being, and uniqueness that is Yountville is renowned for by allowing any retail establishment to set up shop here in Yountville for the use and sale of cannabis. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you're next.
Good evening. Thank you so much. For the record, my name is Erin Gore. I'm a resident of Sonoma County. Specifically, I live in Healdsburg. I'm actually a local elected official, much like y'all. I am the board chair of Healdsburg District Hospital. I'm a mom. I'm married to a second-generation vintner. We have 2 wine brands, one with Constellation, and I'm a cannabis operator in Cloverdale. I actually have an edible company specifically. I make products for women to bring them more joy and to help them with mental health. Specifically, we focus on prescription and alcohol. How can we use less dependence in our day-to-day life with plant medicine? I think, to me, the biggest thing as being a local elected official and a community member and a mom is around safety. The thing I tell my communities locally is cannabis is here. It's everywhere. I bet every concierge will tell their local guests where to buy it and who to buy it from. I bet many of these people in the audience make their own edibles or make their own tinctures. You've all probably heard VapeGate on CNN. This is about providing legal access to quality tested products for people to find a healthier alternative to prescription medicine and alcohol. This is not a safety for crime. As a local operator in Cloverdale for 2 years with a vertically integrated business, I've actually reduced the crime rate in my community, and it's something I'm really proud of. We actually provide video to the police. They come by on a regular basis. We help them locally. Our community members are proud. We have a little library for the apartments next door for the children. We're really proud to be part of the community and to actually improve where we live. And so I think it's something to make sure that you get real access to real facts, and you look at what regulated cannabis provides from a safety perspective for consumers. People are buying it, people are using it. Talk to all the hotels in town is probably a big nuance for them, for people smoking in their room and probably overdosing using DIY edibles for sure. So when you buy in the regulated landscape, you're controlled with how much you buy, how much you consume. Everything is lab tested. Everything is farmed to regenerative standards. So that safety piece is so much safer than if you buy on the illicit market. And that's something that I think is really important to keep at the forefront, especially as for looking at for your community members. A couple statistics about my business. 62% of my customers are women. I'm in over 117 dispensaries across the state. In Sonoma County alone, 70% are over the age of 35. 32% are over the age of 55. Baby boomers and women are the fastest growing demographic of cannabis users. This is not the bro culture of the past. These are people really looking for health and wellness. And so I just wanted to offer my services to the council and to the community. If I can help educate, if you would like to come for a tour, if I can provide you any information on the lab testing processes, I'd be happy to be a resource to help provide real education into what the industry looks like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to keep it neutral, please. We're not going to have applause for or against or any other outbursts. Not that it was a violent outburst, but none. We'll keep a decorum in the room, please. Thank you. So who's next? Mr. Hill, I think you're up.
Doug Hill, I'm a resident of Yountville. A couple of years ago, my son-in-law came to me with an idea to create CBD-infused wines for Hill Family Estate. I was very resistant. I did not use these types of drugs. My children went to Yountville schools and had been in the DARE program, Just Say No to Drugs. I began to research health claims surrounding CBD and cannabis products. While the science appeared to be promising, I could not get over the fact that I had always considered drugs to be taboo. Wouldn't a CBD-infused product taint our brand? As I asked about cannabis, I discovered that a lot more people than I ever expected use these products. Even friends in their 60s and 70s use cannabis products as sleep aids and pain relief. Most of us in town have spent a majority of our lives with the impression that cannabis is a bad drug that will attract a low-life element. I continue to educate myself with regard to cannabis, and and I better understand the widespread demand for these products. I am concerned about the future viability of Yountville. The fabric of our community is changing. When I purchased the Antique Fair as a location for our Hill Family Estate, we were the second tasting room in town. The owner told me that Yountville used to have 13 antique stores, 13 bars, and 13 whorehouses. Most of these businesses have not survived the passage of time. With 17 tasting rooms in town now, we see less than half of the traffic that we were seeing 10 years ago. Our operating expenses exceed revenues, and without other sales channels, we wouldn't afford to keep the lights on. The Napa Valley wine industry is being challenged by the fact that millennials are not showing the same preference for wine as the older generations. I think that the council is appropriately looking at ways to make sure that Yountville stays relevant to change. There's a strong demand for cannabis products, which are now legal. I support your efforts to use your discretion to allow legal cannabis sales in Yountville if you think they are prudent. I too long for the days that passed when our homes were filled with working families whose children attended Yountville Elementary School. Times have changed, and it is up to us to keep up with change and maintain relevance in this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I did want to ask our other law enforcement personnel, was there anything that you wanted to add, or are we going to defer to the undersheriff tonight? That one? Okay, great. So you're just here because you like to hang out with us. Thank you. We like to have you here. Who's next?
No.
Don't tease us like this. Oh, do you need to clear a path? Is that what we need? I was just trying to leave. Oh. I love that.
Let the guy go.
Well, we're going to make it a big, embarrassing departure now.
Hey.
We wore him down. It's only 8:20. We have hours left.
We have hours.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. So who else would like to speak? It's not a public hearing, but eventually, when no one gets up, we will end the public comment for tonight, remembering that this is not the end of the dialogue. We have all committed to this ongoing conversation. So tonight is not your last chance to share. Yes, Vicki.
I'll just share. I'm Vicki Vernig, and I just wanted to say I'm a mother of a teenager living in town. And I'm also a medical social worker, and I worked 10 years in alcohol drug rehab up at St. Helena Hospital. And I saw a lot of issues with addiction and behaviors and how people are affected from marijuana. I guess I didn't really plan anything. I wasn't really planning to get up here and talk, but I wanted to just say that I know the difference between CBD and THC. My mother's going to be 95 this weekend, and I used the CBD on her, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. It's good for pain. It's a cool product, and it's a great thing. And then I learned from my really good friend who's an ER physician that she just went to a medical conference, and that they're finding new things about how CBD is affecting people when they're on other medications. And that it can hurt your liver, it can, all these things. And I was really grateful that I didn't give her the CBD tincture that I was going to give her when she broke her pelvis. I had used CBD products on her for her broken ribs, but now I'm holding back because there just isn't enough research on how medically, it affects people with the latest research. Again, having a teenager in town and having access to cannabis here locally, marijuana, I'm a little uncomfortable with that because it's now the kids are getting the message that it's cool, it's legal, it's fine, try it. And it really, if I don't know if you guys have tried it or not, and edibles, and you can get them in gummies and how it affects you, I'm really uncomfortable with it here. I know you can I've been to the dispensary down in Napa and Vallejo. It's close. People can get it. It can be delivered here. And I don't know if, you know, if you guys are going to take the time to really specify the specific products and what is going to be accessible to everybody in the town. I have 40 more seconds, so I can stand up.
You're right. You're right.
So anyways, any questions for me about that? I really don't want it here.
How's Connor's jump shot?
Yeah, well, he is not playing right now.
Okay. We're
And
next door
maybe-
neighbors, so that's why I could ask that question.
So anyways, yeah, but he is 17, and as you know, vaping is a big issue. The kids get the wrong message. I'll go on. I wrote a letter to the editor a year ago on the anniversary of Jennifer's, when she was shot, and the anniversary up there. She is a coworker, or she worked in the field of rehab with teenagers, and was also very against kids and teenagers getting access to cannabis. And I'm very sensitive to that. We're coming up on the 2nd year anniversary, and so I'm just putting it out there. So
Okay.
thank you, and my
Thank
time's
you.
up.
Vicki. Yes. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Lori,
I have a question.
please wait till you're at the microphone so everybody can hear
Okay,
you.
this is Lori Hennick, and a lady friend of mine asked me to read her letter on her behalf. Am I allowed to do that?
As long as it's under 202 minutes and 50 seconds.
Okay, it is. Okay, this is written by Mary McCrae. She lives on 2020 Monroe, and she starts out with do no harm. The genesis of all good business practice and practices in general is to do no harm. As our city council, the people of Yountville would expect you to follow this practice. Bringing a cannabis dispensary to Yountville violates this common code of ethics. Studies show, per WebMD, that marijuana smoke has many of the same harmful substances as tobacco, and often more of them. And the manner in which cannabis is inhaled and held in the lungs for longer periods than tobacco smoke leads researchers to conclude that marijuana could be more dangerous than tobacco. If you are concerned about gas leaf blowers, you had better be concerned about cannabis smoke. Buzz driving is becoming a large problem in states where cannabis is legal. Quite recently, a traffic death caused by cannabis buzz driver in Illinois was cited where it was recently legalized. For many years, I was on the board of a nonprofit on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, helping students improve their reading skills due to the fact that at one time prisons were being built in California by the number of 5th graders that could not read. The neighborhood was safe, but then a dispensary came in and all things changed. An uptick in petty crimes, unsavory types coming in and out of the dispensary, cars running while passenger or drivers is running in to buy their pot. It brought everything down. What was once a decent area became gritty, to put it kindly. Is this what you want for Yountville? Former Governor John Hickenlooper of Colorado, who was residing when Colorado legalized marijuana consumption, today says that it was a big mistake. Let's learn from others. Yountville is a lovely community, and residents are often improving their properties. I ask that you do not bring down this community, especially since the majority of the residents do not want pot sold here. With the high-valued hotel tax, property tax, and various other taxes the city collects and the lavish number of city employees, the income generated will not be that significant. It is valiant of you to consider all types of businesses, but as one Yountville citizen voiced at another meeting, will residents suffer without a dispensary? I think we all know the answer to that. And with a dispensary in Napa, only miles away, and cannabis home delivery, what is the need? As an owner of several properties in this town we love, I ask you to boldly do no harm.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Anyone else? The rest of you are here just for the pure pleasure of it all.
I would like to move on.
That's okay. I want to give everybody a chance that hasn't had a chance to speak. So, is that it for public comment? You're sure? Somebody out there is thinking twice about it. Vicky's not the only one that didn't plan on it and still got up here. Okay, so we'll continue. I'll invite the council to share any thoughts, questions that have come up, or comments. Again, we're going to continue the conversation in the future. It might be at a standing subcommittee meeting. It might be the next, not until the next regular full council meeting. But comments or thoughts from council? Councilmember Mueller?
Well, got a lot of little pieces, but one of the things that we talked about earlier was the continuing need for the Cannabis Standing Committee. I think that we're getting very engaged with the public. We've got some draft ordinances to discuss. I think it would be valuable for our community that all of our future discussions occur at council meetings. So if 2 members of the ad hoc who might just have gotten assigned to another ad hoc earlier wouldn't take any offense, I think that's one thing we could talk about.
We're not ending the standing committee.
Well, I'm just suggesting that we may not need it anymore, and maybe really have all these discussions in public.
I see what you're saying.
At this point, you've just gotten some new assignments earlier that I would assume you wouldn't really mind that. So that's one thing I think that we could have maybe a short discussion on tonight.
About whether we still need to have the standing committee or not?
Right. Just other thoughts on that.
Let's hold that for now. Let's see if we have any other comments or questions about the content of the public comment. If not, then we can go back to that. Yeah. General feedback.
You know, I appreciate what Kim Cook said, and I honestly believe that it may come to the point where we have to ask all of you to make the decision and get it on the ballot, actually.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Durham, did you have comments?
2 things, because a couple of points were brought up about decisions being made in a vacuum and wanted the process to be out there. So I just wanted to clarify. You know, I've had extended office hours. Last couple of weeks, I actually have office hours every week before my town council meeting here. And as some of you have called me, some of you have emailed me, which has been great. And for those who've shown up, it's been a great dialogue. Actually, I had one of my best dialogues last night for 2 hours with Sergeant Hallman of the town of Yountville. Spent quite a bit of time going over the draft ordinance, going over the history of Yountville, going over my experiences, going over my viewpoints of the community, and getting his viewpoints of his history and his community. And that was pretty amazing. And this is the second time I've met with him. The other time was at Kelly's Fuel. And I barely got a word in edgewise because he spent the first 45 minutes chatting to every single person who walked through, which was actually a good sign. So I greatly appreciate his time. With that being said, also, you know, I got a lot of pushback at one of my meetings because apparently I've said the word West Hollywood too much, and I've been told this is not West Hollywood. I've spent a lot of time the last 3 years researching this, and this speaks to sharing the information that you brought up, Mr. Donsker, with other municipalities and with other experiences. I've read Pasadena, Mount Shasta, Malibu, Pacifica, Cloverdale, Cotati, Davis, Sebastopol, Santa Barbara, Napas, Ojai, Fairfax, Grover Beach, West Hollywood, San Luis Obispo, Palm Springs, Santa Rosa, Carpinteria, and the League of California Cities, as well as research from the BCC and other resources. I've met with the city manager of Sebastopol. I've met with the mayor of Sebastopol. I've talked to city staff in Oakland, in San Francisco. I've talked to many lawyers as well, including extensive interaction with our town attorney as well, which has been a very good experience. As I move forward and I have this discussion, none of these decisions or discussions have been done in a vacuum. They've been done with research and education and my time. I stepped up for the ad hoc committee 3.5 years ago because I wanted to understand my community better. I also wanted to understand Humboldt County better. I have a business there. And so as a result, 3.5 years later, I've met some amazing people. I've met operators, I've met growers, I've met manufacturers, I've met drivers. I've toured multitude of dispensaries. I've talked to law enforcement in Napa. I've talked to council members in Napa. Napa has 2 medical dispensaries. Or this second one's getting ready to open. So this has been a process for all of us. And an opportunity for all of us. As many of you know and commented on, I had a pod in front of my house for over a year. I threw down a huge anchor having that pod in front of my house with what I did to my house. I'm not going anywhere. I've been here for 15 years and I was born and raised in Napa. And now I have a chance to realize that I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. And I have an opportunity to try to see what Yountville can and might be for the future. You know, everybody talks about, we still talk about local serving business. And that's a big conversation because retail is changing so much in this community, in the Valley, and throughout the whole U.S. And so as we talk about all these issues, as we move forward, I want to reiterate that I have my office hours. My ad in the Yountville Sun has my mobile number and my email. I'm more than happy to talk. I'm more than happy to share experiences and share your experiences as well. I've been hung up on, which I understand. We don't all have the same views, and that's understandable. A lot of time has gone into this and a thought process, and I'm actually let me back up a second. At the standing committee meeting last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, it was asked as to possibly what's the driving force behind this. I asked for this to come to the council. The town staff had been approached from multitude of businesses about possibility of coming in, and the town could do nothing about it and respond to nothing about it. So as a member of the ad hoc committee at the time, with all of this research and all this time that I've done, and plus all the time and research I knew I would be continuing on as I am even as of today, I've learned more about cannabis testing than I ever thought I would need to know. But the driving force was, it was time for the town to discuss it. It was time for us to have these discussions and have this community involvement that we do now. So I just wanted to put that all out there because of some of the public comment that was made, and I'm positive about a lot of the public comment that was made because there was a lot of positive discussion and there was a lot of openness as well. So thank you very much for all of your time and for all of you that have been coming to the meetings and participating.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. So I don't want to steal your word, Mayor, but I would like to put in context, too, some of my thoughts on the matter. So I've been on the Cannabis Committee, ad hoc and standing, for almost 3 years. I started from knowing nothing, and I have worked very hard to try to educate myself. Every time I think I have a handle on it, there's new data, there are new considerations, including this evening. I heard new things. I got new ideas. I have seesawed back and forth about what might be best for Yountville, because that's the most important thing. I have seesawed back and forth, and I remain on that seesaw tonight. So I am with those of you who are happy that maybe February 18th will not be, or is not going to be, the date, because I think there is time to gather more information. One thing, though, that has been very helpful to me is to actually see on paper the box that we might fit a cannabis business into. And the only way to get to that was to draft this ordinance the resolution, those things. So that has been very helpful. And to go through this discussion and this review, as we have been doing at the standing committee meeting and this evening. Another and truly even more helpful thing is to hear from all of you. You all have been very good to take your time to talk to me, and I'm sure some of my fellow council members. I thank you all for coming tonight. I think those of you who have written, who have called, I have not been above in social situations, buttonholing people and saying, how do you feel about this? Because it's very important. The drivers for me, as I've gotten into this, have been to continuing this discussion, have been the concern about a push down from the state level, is whether a cannabis business is a service that our residents might use, and whether we need a cannabis business to help maintain our tourist dollars. And I think kind of all three of those, except maybe the state issue, have been hit on tonight in public comment. So those are my drivers. As we've continued our discussion, as I've talked to all of you, I've talked to my fellow council members, I've talked to staff, I carry along some facts with me, and I am constantly adding to that database. To go back, I don't want to beat this to death, but to go back to the actual vote on Proposition 64, 1,538 votes were cast for or against. Of that, 976 were in favor, 562 against, which is just a little over 63%, which actually is the state average, which was interesting to me. We've talked about the survey. I understand those numbers. I do. Out of 206 responses, 121 said we do not want a dispensary. 81 said we want a dispensary, or we just don't care, not on our radar. Sort of looking at a bigger picture, though, as I look at the state issue, what the state might try to push onto us, the most recent figures I could find, about 25% of California cities allow retail cannabis business. And the upshot of that is the state is not making the money it thought it would from the cannabis businesses that it expected to be licensed. So I started digging into that a little bit. Last year, the state expected to make $1 billion. It made $288 million. That's a big delta. The state's Bureau of Cannabis Control issued its 2019 report and, quote, local control has significantly stifled the ability to issue cannabis retail licenses. And, quote, it is critical that the state develop and enact policies before the fledgling legal market is completely decimated. I now quote from Governor Newsom's senior advisor on cannabis, who says that the administration plans to consider, quote, substantial system changes this year, 2020, to boost the legal market, including, quote, pushing local jurisdictions to understand the benefits of regulation versus continued prohibition. Again, I've always said to any of you who will listen or talk with me, that has been a big driver for me, what we might get ourselves into. Another thing, the tourist piece of it, I looked up Silicon Valley Bank, which does every year a pretty good report on the wine business. And here is a sort of a summary quote from that. Our review of the components that drive the wine business reveals that retiring wine-loving baby boomers are being replaced by more frugal, spirits-loving millennials and now Gen Zers who consume less alcohol than prior generations. We need to attract those young consumers, but we are doing a poor job of that. And I did hear some of that in the public comment piece. So all of that, though, is eclipsed. Those are all facts that must be considered. Your opinions are facts to me that must be considered. But all of that is eclipsed by, we are a small town. We are a hometown. And whatever happens here, good or bad, whether this council does it, whether you all do it through a ballot initiative or referendum, whether the state pushes it down on us, it's going to have a profound effect on us. And that is my biggest driver. I say all of this to get back where I started. I am still seesawing. I heard new things tonight that I am interested in. And as our discussion proceeds, I want to continue to gather information. I think the survey is an interesting idea. I think a ballot initiative is an interesting idea. So I echo what I think our other council members are saying. We're all in this together, and we're going to navigate forward together to get the best product we can for the place we call home. And I thank you all for all of your time.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Just a few of my own thoughts.
Could I add?
Yes, Councilmember Mueller.
Let me add some of mine first, or
Go ahead.
Okay. I do think I see where the council is talking right now, so I would also like to share my opinion about, because I think everyone's really curious, because I hear this a lot. What's so-and-so thinking? Which way is someone going to say? You know, it's like we have the answer, you know. First of all, we can't really talk to each other. We're only allowed to talk to one council member at a time. It's against the law. Mr. Bell will tell us that. It's a thing called the Brown Act. So we do not have these discussions behind your back and know stuff that you think we know. So that said, when I came to Yountville, that was in 1998, the Bellagio was just getting built. And the reason it was getting built here was because up north of Yountville, they wanted to get built up there, and everyone said no. So it came to Yountville, and we said yes. And in a way, that and the French Laundry coming here kind of started a big Yountville revolution. A lot of times people want to give me a lot of credit because I moved here 20 years ago. I've been on the council for 12 years, so I've been doing this almost, more than half the time I've lived here. But I say we can't take the credit because we've really been a town of yes. Not one of us, not even council and mayors who've come before us, really, I don't give them credit either. It's really because we typically say yes, and we see how it evolves, and we go from there. So, so this is a big question too. I have not made up my mind. Every day I get new information and I go in different directions. By training, I'm a pharmaceutical scientist. I know a lot about drugs. I know a lot about what works, what's safe. I still do those studies. So with this whole cannabis issue, it's quite fascinating because in the drug business, we identify a drug, we figure out if it's safe, then we figure out if it works. Then the FDA decides, okay, what's all the testing that we need to do? Then we manufacture it, and we figure out where that's going to happen. In this business, we did it backwards. We approved it, and now we were left to figure everything out after the fact. So there we have it. It's quite different, but the voters did approve it, and they approved it in Yountville too. So just, I think my takeaway message is I have not made up my mind.
Thank you. So again, a few kind of maybe disjointed thoughts that I have left to share. One is just a reminder, because I think some folks feel like if we allow a retail business in Yountville, that means that we're now going to have cannabis in Yountville. Reality is, as we've brought up before, Prop 64 has allowed every single one of you to grow 6 plants at home. And some of you are doing that. And that's lawful. It's not regulated. You aren't required to have dosage control. You're not required to have labeling control. You can do what you want. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is having a legally regulated, controlled business that's, in my opinion, virtually the same as alcohol and wine. Does that mean I'm dead set on having it here? No. That's my comparison. My comparison is not you go from no cannabis to allowing cannabis, because that's just not the reality. The cannabis is already here. If it's going to be formalized, we should have restrictions about it. We should have context about it. We've seen, and you don't have to go very far north to see what's happened to community that has just been so unwilling to accept anything new. There's a real struggle going on to the north of us when the answer is no. We don't want new business. We don't want anything that we haven't had here for a long time. It's all about the people that live there today, not about the people that are going to be living there tomorrow and in the future. And as Councilmember Moeller just said, thankfully, Yountville has not had that attitude. We have not been reckless, I don't think, in any case when we have been making decisions about what type of business to allow, what type of development to allow. As I stated in my State of the Town, it took Bardessono Hotel 10 years to be developed, and that's just an example of unusual circumstances. But I remember when people were angry that the town let a private citizen, a private family, do what they wanted with their own property, and how it was going to destroy Yountville. And I think we're far from having that negative impact. And I think all of us embrace the Bardessono family as an example of members of our community that care first and foremost about our community, and then also have the right to do what they feel is appropriate with their own property and their own business. I've said this before also, I don't feel like it's my job to legislate your lifestyle. And I think that's what some people are asking us to do. Because someone doesn't want to use cannabis products, that means nobody should be able to do it. I realize we have authorized legal delivery service, and we've also heard from some folks who don't trust the quality and consistency of products they get from businesses outside of their own community. And so that's a factor that I'm considering. I know we even have industry folks here from outside the Napa Valley, and they have a set of circumstances that may relate to us and it may not. Again, more information for us all to consider. This is in no way something that's of my, I have a financial or even personal interest in, to be perfectly candid. I've told many of you, I've never consumed cannabis in my life. I grew up with a judge for a father and a cop for an older brother. And as was mentioned earlier about the DARE program, Just Say No, if I didn't say no, I heard about it. And so it's about how I see the existing residents in our community, the business interests in our community, principally the residents, but also the residents that we're going to have here in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, just like with our general plan. That general plan is not for us in this room. Well, we do have a couple folks that are young enough that it might apply, but one of the challenges that we have as a council, that I'll say I have as a council member and mayor, is to be willing to look to the future and to look beyond my own interest. And I ask that we all do that together. Again, does that mean it's the right thing for Yountville? We're still figuring that out. But I ask people to have an open mind, like we all have and are expected to hear facts and hear other people's opinions that might be your friends and neighbors. You might be learning something new. Either somebody opposes it, you thought might like it, or the other way around. It is important that we continue to gather as much information as we can before we make a decision. We've done it before with some difficult choices. The community center project, another one. For those of you that were here then, it was very divisive. There were some people that felt like it was absolutely inappropriate for Yountville to spend money on a community center. And it has been one of the best things that we ever did as a community to have a heart and soul of our community. It used to be if you wanted to get together, you had no other choice but to go to a restaurant or a tasting room to hang out. There was nowhere just to hang out. There was nowhere to recreate. So again, it gets back to having not only business options, but lifestyle options. Because this is not about getting more revenue. That is not, I don't want to speak for the rest of the council, but I've never heard any of us, first and foremost, say this is about making money. Speaking to the vice mayor's point about the roughly 225 million that I think that was about the number that the state had estimated they actually brought in of the billion. That means about 775 million is still in illicit cannabis sales. That's the stuff that's not dosed. That's the stuff that's not labeled. It's not tracked from bud to sale, seed to sale. Thank you. See, he has done years of research. And I think that's mostly, I'm not going to speak for all of you either, mostly where the concern lies is in the I want to call it a stigma. I want to call it an earned reputation for uncontrolled cannabis use and sales. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not even talking about what some folks feel, and I've brought this up over and over again about what would be a kind of classic or traditional dispensary of selling raw product. We don't know what we're talking about yet. But what we have been committing our focus to is making sure that if we do this, we do it the Yountville way, which is a considerate way, one that feels appropriate and not just because some other city has done it, we have to do it too. We have to be first. We need to make more money. And for those folks that have claimed that this is all driven because we want more tourist dollars, it's not. I have no concern about whether the tourists will be participating in a retail. Now, somebody who actually owns the retail business might care, but that's not my driving consideration either, that we find a way to make more money off the tourists. We are very fortunate to have resources in this town, yes, principally from hotel tax, but that means that it's not from your property tax. And we are able to provide services at a very high level based on revenue that has been generated by visitors to our community. If this offers us another experience, not unlike, as was brought up earlier, when we didn't really have many wine tasting rooms, we had a few bars for sure. I think this is something that we owe it to think about and consider. We may not get there, but we certainly should be looking at it because this is a reality today, and it's going to be a reality going forward in the future. As was referenced, we have at least 2 generations of people growing up right now that don't see alcohol and wine the same way. And they don't look at cannabis the same way either. And so I think we just need to be open-minded about what it is we're talking about and what we're considering, and we'll continue to put the interest of Yountville and our residents first. But recognize that there are a lot of Yountville residents that feel like this is the right direction to go. We're committed to more research, more conversation, and to not taking any action tonight or on February 18th. So with that, I'll wrap up my wandering comments and thank all of you for being here. We will keep everyone informed, obviously, as we're going forward. If we have a subcommittee meeting, that will be noticed. It'll be almost impossible for you to not hear about it. And we want to continue to engage all of you, and that's always our primary goal. So I think that's all we need to have in terms of discussion tonight. And we will, again, thank all of you for being here for that. Yes, Councilmember Durham?
You know, I have to bring it up. Should we share the budget dates that are already on this, on the calendar?
All
So
five of
all of our constituents can come to our budget meetings as well?
Oh,
It'd be
that's,
great.
that's clearing
Look-
the room
look at
right
how you-
there.
See how well that's
there we
working
go.
out.
Look at how you clear the room.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Now, we have to stay here and continue our meeting, but you're welcome to stay. But we know that I think all but one of you is going to leave. And remember, if you want to leave your email so that we can make sure to get you information, please do so.
Oh, Gary, you have to stay. You have to stay.
And if you could just please keep it quiet outside so that we can get back to our business, it would be appreciated.
That's your planning director.
Yeah. So we're going to get back to our business so we don't have to be here too terribly late. Thank you. And we're going to go ahead and move on to the rest of our agenda. Next up, we have, since we have no staff informational reports, correct, Steve? Council meeting reports. And Samantha, thanks for closing the door. First, Napa Valley Transportation Authority, I believe the Vice Mayor is going to report out on that.
Thank you. The NVTA met last week. We reviewed and approved the countywide transportation plan, which is called Mobility 2045, available on the NVTA website. We reviewed and accepted the audit. It was a clean audit, clean opinion. We approved a cooperative agreement with Caltrans that will it is necessary and will be very useful in, as we go forward, trying to complete the section of the Vine Trail between St. Helena and Calistoga. And we also approved a letter of support to bring the SMART train to the Vallejo Ferry.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure we can skip over the Cannabis Standing Committee. Just taking a shot at that.
Get rid of it.
Parking Ad Hoc Committee, is there any report out from the Parking Committee?
No.
Okay. Emergency Preparedness Ad Hoc, is there any report out?
No, not yet.
Thank you. League of California Cities update. I'll throw a few things out here very quickly and then ask if anyone else has more. I leave early tomorrow morning for 3 days in Sacramento for the League of California Cities New Mayors and Council Academy, and also 7 policy committee meetings over Thursday and Friday. Some of our council are members of those policy committees, and the town manager and I will be part of a panel at the Academy on the relationship between city managers and mayors, or council members, I think. So that ought to be educational. Also, I will be meeting all day tomorrow in the Capitol with legislators, including members of the governor's senior staff, on a lot of legislative activity going on now. And that'll be in my role as president of the League of California Cities. So I know we have a couple policy committee members. Is there anything more from the
I can
League? Yes, Councilmember Mueller?
Yeah, I'll be Friday attending, actually, I'm starting my second decade on the Environmental Quality Committee. I've just finished my first 10 years, so now I'm starting year 11 on the Environmental Quality Committee for the California League of Cities, and we have a very full agenda, so we can report out next time.
I'll see you there.
I think we're going to see just about everybody there.
Yes, I'll be at all of them, though.
Yeah, okay, you'll be at all.
Yes, Councilmember Dornbecker?
So I also will be attending a policy committee of which I'm a member, the Revenue and Taxation Policy Committee. And that's on Thursday. Tomorrow I will go up and I have an ad hoc sort of with the leadership of the North Bay Division dinner, an abbreviated meeting. And then the next day I'll have my policy committee meeting.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
And while Councilmember Mueller is starting her 10th her second decade. I will be attending my first meeting on a policy committee, and that is the Housing, Community, and Economic Development Committee on Friday.
Thank you. That's it for the League of California Cities right now. Reports and announcements. Now, the question is about the, I think we reported out on the, you talking about the countywide climate action? I think we reported out at our last council meeting, didn't we? Or did we not?
I thought we had a meeting since then.
Well,
I could be wrong.
if we didn't report out, or if we did, Councilmember Dornbecker and I are members of the, representing Yountville on the countywide climate action committee, and we all collect, so 2 members of each council and the Board of Supervisors discussed how we are going to be more resilient, more energy efficient, and bring other policy and programs that we might be able to share countywide and even regionally to have very strong positive impacts on climate change and climate action. So that kind of generally sums it up. I will be missing the February 4th council meeting. Thank you in advance, Vice Mayor, for chairing that meeting. I'll be traveling to Washington, D.C. for a day and a half of meetings at the Capitol. That's, again, in my role with the League and also the National League of Cities. And I'm hoping the weather is better than what's forecast right now for D.C. 2 things coming up. The Yountville Kiwanis Crab Feed, Saturday, January 25th. I'm looking to any of our Kiwanis members, sold out. I think that'll be, as usual, a very fun event at the community center. And also the Yountville International Short Film Festival is coming up February 6th through the 9th. And buy your tickets early and often. Any other reports from council? Seeing none, I will happily entertain a motion to adjourn
So moved.
at 9:02. There is a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yes, it's early. Thank you. Thank you and good night.
Is this the